Guy MTV, David Wilcock. This is Wisdom Teachings. I am so glad to be back with you right now. Today's episode is absolutely mind-blowing because what we're going to be talking about is really kind of like the ultimate ancient astronaut / conspiracy theory. This knowledge that I'm about to impart to you is utterly revolutionary because if the skeptics were to accept what's right in front of their face, we would have a complete elimination of the problem of people not being willing to believe in extraterrestrial intelligence, in higher spiritual concepts, and in the idea that the human being could evolve to some higher form of what it means to be human. So I've set up some groundwork. We've done 6 episodes so far. And in those 6 episodes, I explained to you that DNA functions as a quantum wave, that it's written into the background of space and time. And this is not supposition. This is scientific information. When we take that knowledge and apply it into the laboratory, we also find that one type of species can be energetically transformed into another type of species through nothing more than shining a laser through one type of organism and then redirecting that laser beam into another type. We showed this with the frog and salamander experiment, in which energy from a laser is shined through salamander eggs and is directed into frog eggs, and the frogs mutate into salamanders, showing no evidence of having been laid by a frog. These are the tiny little eggs. Now, I want you to think about what that implies for the traditional view of Darwinian evolution. Look, I'm not a creationist. I'm not saying that the world was created 7,000 years ago and that all the stratospheric layers of rock that we've dug up and carbon dated, that's wrong. What I am saying, though, is that evolutionary change is energetically driven, and I've given you the proof. The next stage of our argument is to say then that if DNA is a quantum wave, humans are a quantum product of galactic intelligence. Humans will naturally evolve wherever and however they can. And I will argue that the human being is meant to evolve into a state greater than where it is now. I have discussed to you that when you unveil Christianity, you find out that Jesus was teaching reincarnation. There is a quote where the disciples ask Jesus, "Who hath sinned, this man or his father, that he was born blind?" Jesus doesn't say, "What do you mean? How could he have sinned before he was born?" Jesus says, no, in this case, he was born blind so that the works of God could be made manifest through him. Now, if I'm sounding like a preacher, I don't mean to, but what I'm saying to you is every religion originally taught reincarnation, but the traditional Roman government stripped reincarnation from Christianity to create the artificial belief in hell. The word hell is Gehenna, and it actually referred to the garbage dump, as I said, where they burned trash, which included dead bodies. Jesus saying that means that you will go to karma if you commit sin, which simply in the original definition means that you are going against the will of the moral code of the universe, which is free will. So look, why, if you believe in reincarnation, and we can prove that reincarnation is true. Dr. Ian Stevenson went into the Middle East and he took records of children who could remember their past lives allegedly and followed up on them, found out that they had forensic face matches to who they said they had been, found out that they remembered their name accurately, they remembered people that they knew, situations, the houses, where things were in the house, extremely specific detail. And Dr. Jim Tucker has followed that research through and used forensic face matching technology from the police department so that if you committed a crime in your past life, you could still be found guilty for it in this life. It's that good. Now think about this. if reincarnation is true, and if you keep reincarnating as a human being, then where is it going? Where is the point of what's supposed to happen? In Christianity, Jesus allegedly ascended. He turned into a light body, and I've already discussed with you the concept of the rainbow body, the concept that we can, in fact, evolve to the next level of our being. It turns out, in the Law of One material, which throughout this Wisdom Teachings course, I'm going to be giving you information from that, they clearly described a 25,000-year cycle. They said that humanity evolves in 25,000-year increments, and that at the end of these cycles we go through, if we're ready, what they called the harvest or the ascension, a spontaneous change. Now, I had read this after reading something that tipped me off right away to what they were talking about. In 1995, I read Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock. The most amazing thing in Fingerprints of the Gods to me that really jumped out, because a lot of it I'd already read before, but what I hadn't seen was that there was a unified worldwide message from the gods hidden in ancient mythology. Now, what am I saying here? I'm saying that we have over 30 mythologies from all over the world. The middle of the Pacific Ocean, India, China, Tibet, Finland, Iran, everywhere. The Native American tradition, you name it. They all have a secret code in which these mythologies are programmed to give us. Now, how could that be possible? Everyone said, as I said in this previous slide here, that they were in contact with gods. And in later episodes, you're going to see those gods in action. I'm going to show you pictures of them, and we're going to have archaeological evidence of them existing on Earth, including skeletal remains that have been genetically tested. There is no way for a skeptic to stand on a platform of truth and say that extraterrestrials do not exist. It is a ridiculous argument, and it is only fueled by corporate propaganda. Thank God Gaiam TV is letting me talk about whatever I want to talk about. There is no censorship. I am giving you the truth. And the truth is that every culture on Earth was contacted by extraterrestrial humans. You're going to see them in future episodes. Those extraterrestrial humans came here to give us a message. And the most important message that they gave us, believe it or not, was on this. The precession of the equinoxes. Now, what's that? The precession of the equinoxes appears to us as a cycle in the Earth's wobbling behavior. The Earth is rotating in one direction, as you can see here, but then there's a counter-rotating wobble going in the opposite direction. And that counter-rotating wobble actually takes 25,920 years to complete. Why would this matter? Why would this be so important? What's the big deal? Counter-rotating wobble? It's like, it doesn't make a lot of sense, okay? It's strange. Until I had a precession breakthrough. This only came to me in August of the year 2012, right before the end of the Mayan calendar. And I was trying to solve some problems. I still didn't understand what this precession was. And then I remembered the work of Walter Cruttenden. And here he is. Walter Cruttenden created a book in which he argued that we live in a binary solar system. Now, I have a huge number of slides that I can go through on this, and I do at my weekend conferences. I'm not going to go through all those here. I just want to get to the core, because these are half-hour episodes and we have a lot of material to cover. But in his book, Lost Star of Myth and Time, Walter Cruttenden lays out an incredible body of evidence showing us that this is how things really work. We are not in a solitary solar system. We have a binary solar system. He argues, in fact, that 85% of all the stars identified in our galaxy, and this is from NASA, are already confirmed to be binary. And our binary companion may very well be a black sun, or what's also called a brown dwarf. Now, Walter Cruttenden talked about this in his documentary from PBS called The Great Year, which is narrated by none other than James Earl Jones, who was the voice of Darth Vader. Luke, I am your father. So you can imagine how intense it is to watch this documentary with the voice of Darth Vader narrating it. Again, the basic argument that they're making here is that our sun orbits another star, and that secondary star is a brown dwarf. Now, he suggests it might also be Sirius, and he and I are having a polite little scholarly debate in which we're arguing over that. I totally believe it's a black sun, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Every Masonic symbol that's ever been done has the sun, the moon, and a companion object. And I have a huge body of slides that I go through at my all-weekend events on that. Now, here's the deal. We take 25,920 years to make one orbit around this dark sun. Once you realize that's what it is, it makes sense for why they called this 25,000-year cycle the Great Year. We're talking about an orbit, a year. It's just that in Earth years it takes 25,920 years to complete. Now, why does this matter? Why is this so important? Well, first of all, if we are in fact orbiting another star, that companion star could have energy fields. And again, it's not enough time for me to go into it here, but I do make a very compelling argument that there is geometry that is holding the planets in place, and that same geometry is going to be generated by this guy, by our companion star, so that we come into geometric alignments. And when we align with that geometry, much more energy is coming in. The point that I want to make right now is that the Earth's precession, this wobble that takes 25,920 years, it's not just happening to the Earth, it's happening to the whole solar system. Everything in the solar system is doing that. And Walter Cruttenden has excellent information that shows that that's actually what's going on. We are, in fact, moving through this much greater orbit, and everything in the solar system is tilting like a saucer as we do this. So that's what's causing this. This movement that you see in the Earth's axis is the entire ecliptic plane of the solar system going like this all at the same time. Now, the reason why this matters, again, is that even though this orbit is ultimately going to be elliptical, that's only caused by the pressure of the galactic energy. When we actually flatten it out and take away that galactic pressure, which is basically galactic gas and dust, as we orbit the center of the galaxy, you can regularize our orbit around this companion star and make it into a perfect circle. And the geometry will now be shown because that circle's not just a circle, it's the equator of a sphere. So we're dealing with geometry that fits into a sphere, sacred geometry, the Platonic solids, generated by the companion star, which we come into alignment with at the end of the 25,000-year cycle. Guess when that was? Well, we just had that. It was December 21st, 2012, the end of the Mayan calendar. All of a sudden, all this stuff starts to make sense. The ages of the zodiac now are actually regions of galactic space that we're traveling through that may very well have energetic influences on us. That's the main thrust of my new book, The Synchronicity Key, that's going to be out in August of 2013, and we're going to have way more to talk about. Now check this out. This diagram suggests that our sun is orbiting a black sun, which is what you see in the middle there. The black sun and our sun, we're moving around this orbit. So as our sun is coming along here, this is where we are right now. Now, bear in mind that the speed is going to change. The speed of the orbit will change as we circle through. Out here in these regions, you're dealing with it being really, really slow. It's just going to slow down. It starts to pick up speed here, but then it's really slow here, and we go faster and faster in our level of acceleration until we get here, and this is where we're at maximum acceleration. Now think about what I'm telling you. As we reach maximum velocity, what does Einstein tell us about the nature of space and time? He said that as we move through space, we move through time as well. The faster our velocity goes, the more energy we're moving through, and it actually accelerates clock time. Now that's interesting, because Einstein in his later years, as I argue in my book, Source Field Investigations, did say that there has to be a physical energetic medium that we're moving through in space to make that happen, which historically was called the ether. Now they call it dark energy or dark matter, or there's plenty of different names for it. Zero-point energy, the quantum foam, virtual particles. The point is that the faster we're moving through space, the more energy we get, and it's going to charge things up. And because of the source field phenomenon that I spent the first 6 episodes laying out for you, we know that this is biological energy. We're surrounded by these squiggling lines of force that make DNA. And these energetic patterns will increase in concentration based on how fast you move through space. They will increase. There's more density. There's more energy. And it's going to elevate our level of evolution. And that's a model that I am not just hanging out over the edge. If you watch the first 6 episodes, and you're not just coming into this clean and fresh, I highly recommend going to Gaiam TV, start with episode 1. This is sort of like a university class. This is your parallel university. And you got to start from the beginning to make sense out of everything that I'm telling you. I'm doing this very deliberately, step by step for you. So, a binary star system, of course, in its idealized form, as you see here, has 2 orbits that are going on. Both stars are orbiting each other, as you can see here. So it's the combined movement that actually involves that geometry. Now we have various orbital phases, as you can see here, and the only reason why I brought those slides in is to show you that when the stars are at their closest point, periapsis, they're at maximum velocity. As they move farther apart, they go through this decrease in speed. And at apoapsis, the farthest point, they're at their farthest speed. Now, Walter Cruttenden and other researchers are making the argument that as we move slower, we go into the dark ages. There's fewer people on Earth. Human society is more primitive. We don't have the degree of civilization, and it's as we speed up through this binary orbit and we get closer to that conjunction in the middle, that we then have that increase in source field energy, as I would call it. And again, down here it says, my stat was wrong. It's 80%, not 85%. 80% of all the stars in our galaxy are binary stars. So they're doing this. They're making this movement as they go together. And another important point that Walter Cruttenden makes, which I want to mirror here, is that binary systems change depending on the distance to the other star. When they're really close by, we see a ring that forms around both of them, and that's very standard. That's 0 to 3 astronomical units. And an astronomical unit represents the distance from I believe it's the distance from the Sun to the Earth. Yes. So 0 to 3 astronomical units, that's really close, you get a disk. 3 to 50 astronomical units, there's no observed disk. It's just hovering there in space. And then down here, when you get 50 to 500 astronomical units, there may be a ring around one, but not the other. Now, this is our local neighborhood. And what you're seeing here is the Sun, of course. And then you're seeing some of the nearest stars that we have. Here's Alpha Centauri, okay? And that appears to be inhabited. We've heard that from insiders, that there are ETs living on that planet. In fact, there's 2 different groups of ETs that live on Alpha Centauri. And I could talk more about that, but it's basically they're both human, and there's one type which apparently is more of a, like the Mesoamericans, and they live on a desert planet, and then there's another type that lives on a very lush planet, and they actually have dark green skin, and they photosynthesize light. Now, this distance that we're looking at here is probably about as far away as any of these companion stars would be. Now, here's where we get to the good stuff. Santayana and Van de Schende. These are our historians who put this whole thing together. They looked at over 30 different ancient mythologies from all over the world, combined the research together in their epic book, Hamlet's Mill, and what they concluded, this is what Graham Hancock wrote about it, is that for some inexplicable reason and at some unknown date, certain archaic myths from all over the world were co-opted to give you information on the precession of the equinoxes. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? Now, what did they do? They normally used the metaphor of a grain mill. This is a millstone, as you see here. You throw your wheat into this mill, you grind the millstone around in circles, and then, at the end, you pull out the wheat. Now, there's myths from all over the world, including in the book of Daniel. They're from everywhere. And they describe the process of this mill grinding around, but that as the mill grinds on, the quality of what comes out of it keeps decreasing to the point where it becomes inedible. And at the end of that cycle, the axle actually breaks. And that corresponds to a myth of the world. Now, the hero in most of these myths actually dies. And only the gods, Frida and Freya, can come in to save the day. Now, gods often refer to stars in these ancient myths. It seems to be saying that there's two stars pulling on the Earth's axis, and that this mill literally represents the Earth's axis. The axle of the mill here corresponds to the Earth's axis, and this corresponds to the wobbling movement. Now, historians have also wondered, why is it that all these different cultures around the world got the idea to make a grain mill at the same time? Well, they told you why. The gods gave them that technology. And they gave it to them not just to make bread, because if you got police need donuts, and you got to make them something so that they'll do their jobs, right? But in addition to that, it gives them an opportunity to create this myth which shows up all over the place. So this is a truly worldwide scope. The original Icelandic legend called him Amlodi. That was the hero's name. Hamlet. That's where Hamlet comes from. He is the Lord of the Golden Age. Isn't that something? The myths talk about the coming of the Golden Age. He's a carrier of fate who must yield when his mission is accomplished, meaning he dies, and he sinks back into the depths of time. He's the once and future king. This essay follows him farther and farther from the Northland to Rome, Finland, Iran, India. He appears in Polynesian legends. It stands for an astronomical process, the shifting of the sun through the signs of the zodiac, which determines the ages, each of which numbers thousands of years. Now, each end of an age brings a world era, a twilight of the gods, the great structures collapse, pillars topple that supported the great fabric, floods and cataclysms herald the shaping of a new world. We're already seeing that now. The Indonesian tsunami, Hurricane Katrina. So these earth changes are part of what we're seeing right now. It's all coming together at this time. The prophecies are coming true, and I'm going to have a lot more information to share with you about that. Floods and cataclysms herald the shaping of this new world, and the code is embedded in many different forms, as you're going to see here. Stars, numbers, colors, plants, forms, verse structures. This is a huge framework of connections revealed at many levels. And the scope shows us, this is a worldwide scope, showing us a true edifice, a mathematical matrix, a world image that fits many levels and is kept in order by strict measure. Now, what in the heck is this golden age that they're actually talking about? Well, this is where things get a lot more interesting. Notice the words that I have at the bottom, etos and seklos. When you see any reference to golden age, that's actually a mistranslation. There are other traditions, there are other books from the same period of time that are translating these words that they took to mean age differently. The word age actually means race. So I'm not saying that this is some Nietzschean, Hitlerian Wunderkind. This is not the idea of the master race. Please don't get me wrong. But what I am saying is that these ancient traditions, these ancient mythologies from all over the world predicted that we were going to change into beings of light at the end of the cycle. Now, December 21st, 2012 came and went. And as far as I know, I still got a little bit of a backache here. I'm not a light being yet. So something is still waiting to happen. And that something could be a microevolutionary change, an energetically stimulated evolution that could be going on here. We may be turning into light beings very soon. And the American founding fathers, as it turns out, inherited a prophecy about that very change. And that prophecy is written into the US dollar. Now, I don't want to leave you on a cliffhanger, but we are out of time for this episode, just about. So I want to just start to set up some of what this says. First of all, Annuit Septis, the conception. Septis means conception. Anu, annual. Annual meaning the year. But it's not just any year, is it? It's the great year. The birth of the great year. Then look at the bottom. Novus Ordo Seclorum. New secular order. What are they getting at here? What is this new secular order? In the next episode, I'm going to lay it all out for you. And I also want to point out, though, a few more things before we go there, which is look at the pyramid, okay? The pyramid technology, as I've argued in my book, Source Field Investigations, is built to harness the source field. Pyramid, the derivation of the word pyramid, means fire in the middle. So literally there is this vortex energy that is making the matter of the pyramid itself, and it's harnessed by the shape. It starts swirling inside, creating this fire in the middle. And then you got, of course, the Eye of Horus here, which represents the activated pineal gland. Your pineal gland is this third eye. And that pineal activation is very strongly indicated as occurring at the end of the great year. Annuit Septis, the new great year, is set to begin. So let's get back to this guy right here. So what this is saying is that we are transfiguring. We are going through transfiguration. That is your wisdom teaching for today. The prophecy of who you will become and how you're going to get there has been encoded and embedded in ancient mythological teachings for every culture in the world. A transfiguration. Now, the people that did the Great Seal and the dollar bill only inherited something, but most of these gods taught us to be more loving, to be more compassionate, to be good people. So please don't interpret this as a satanic or Luciferian prophecy. Nothing could be further from the truth. The adversary, as we lovingly call him sometimes, likes to disguise himself in things that appear to be good, or that were good originally that he contorts. This is another example. So we are on the threshold of an awakening. I believe that massive changes are coming. This is Wisdom Teachings with David Wilcock, and we'll see you next week here at Gaiam TV. Are you ready? This is David Wilcock, Gaiam TV, Wisdom Teachings, and we are on a mission to find the truth of one of the most incredible mysteries of world history. How is it that so many mythologies around the world, all of which said that they were given by the gods, that these extraterrestrial humans, or angels if you will, came to Earth and gave them these spiritual teachings about being more loving, being more in tune with nature, also encoded something in mythology. Dozens of different mythologies, we've identified over 30 of them, that all have information predicting a coming golden age. This information is fascinating, and here at Gaiam TV we are not censored. Even though this is considered one of the most sensitive, highly classified secrets of the military-industrial complex, what I'm telling you now, they know about this. And in today's episode, we're going to be getting into the Great Seal of the United States, the symbols of the Illuminati. We're going to talk about what they really know. And we are not gagged. I can say anything I want. Gaiam TV has over 5,000 unique metaphysical and spiritual titles, including over 50% of the entire available catalog of yoga and fitness videos that are out there on the market today. So you can get in shape. It's a mind-body-spirit integration, and if you are watching this television show as a Gaiam TV subscriber, I want to hear your questions. You mail us in your questions on the comment forms on the website, and then if you get picked, we will ask you to submit your question as a video. You will be right here on my screen. We will see your face for however many thousands of people, or maybe hundreds of thousands of people are watching this show. You'll be right here. Ask me your question, and I'll answer it for you. So that's one of the benefits of being a subscriber. That's why we're doing this. We want this to be your show, not just my show. We want to get together and find the frontier of this knowledge, find the mystery. So this is a very essential point that any talk that I want to give is going to focus on. These two historians were at the top of their game. These are the kind of people that when they write a paper, it's published in peer-reviewed academic journals loaded with footnotes at the end. They were highly respected in the academic community. Now, they poured through all these different mythologies around the world, and they came up with something so fantastic, so fascinating, that it led to them writing an entire academic work called Hamlet's Mill, as I said in the previous episode, which argued that this weird Earth cycle, the precession of the equinoxes, was encoded into mythologies from all over the world. Very strange. Now, why would they do that? What is this Earth cycle to begin with? The Earth cycle is a wobble that appears in the Earth's axis. It's a 25,920 year change in the actual position. This means that if you build, let's say here in Egypt, you build a pyramid and you align it with a certain star, it's going to drift by 1 degree every 72 years in the night sky. So that alignment is going to change. So you don't get that to work for very long. As I said in the last episode, we have a precession breakthrough. We finally know why this seemingly innocuous little cycle in the Earth matters so much, and that's the work of Walter Cruttenden, who wrote an incredible book that proves that we live in a binary solar system, and that means that this Earth wobble is actually caused by us orbiting another star, which he calls the lost star, hence the title of his book, Lost Star of Myth and Time. Now this star that we're orbiting around, here it's called the Black Sun. Notice that we're having an elliptical orbit, so that as we move through space, it's going slower, and then it accelerates as we go towards where we are now. This would be like the December 21st, 2012 point that we just passed through. These represent the ages of the zodiac, which are units of time, 2,160 years in length each, that determine how we're going through this. So binary star system, again, it's both stars making elliptical orbits around each other, and the speed increases as they come closer at the point called periapsis. And then at the point called apoapsis, they're farther apart, and the speed goes down. As I argued in the last episode, the faster you move through space, the more source field you're moving through, and these binary stars constitute 80% of all the identified stars in our galaxy. So I will argue, actually, that all stars are ultimately going to be at least binary, and that this mechanism of how they play off of each other's energy to stimulate evolution is part of the basic design of the cosmos, and that is mirrored in the Law of One series, as we will show later on in this series. So again, here's our local neighborhood of stars, and we got Alpha Centauri here. This is a new one that was only discovered recently, and yet look at how close it is. That's important because it shows that new stars can be discovered. And if it's a brown dwarf, we may not know about it. It could be literally somewhere around this range, this close to the sun, and we wouldn't know. So this weird cycle, this slow counter-rotating wobble in the Earth's axis, actually is the entire solar system moving together. And the ancient myths nailed that with the metaphor of the grain mill. As the millstone is ground around in circles, it's like the Earth rotating on its axis, which is even easier to see in this illustration. As you see, here is your big millstone, and this is the axle. Now, the worker is going to have to push against this handle here and grind that grain until it's totally fine. The ancient myths all have the grain mill in it. It's a conspiracy theory that archaeologists don't know what to do with, that all these different cultures around the world all had teachings about a mill and that the axle breaks. And Santillana van de Shen were the first one to put that together. And ultimately what it's saying is that there is a golden age is coming into view. The golden age is this idea that something wonderful happens on Earth, a transformation of the Earth into a truly blissful, magnificent state. And the words atos and seklos were originally used to mean age, when in fact the literal translation is race. Now again, this is not a Hitlerian vision of the Übermensch or the Wunderkind. We're not talking about anything like that. This is everybody on Earth, all races, transfiguring into beings of light. And what I'm now seeing, and I found new quotes in the Law of One to support this, is that this change does occur gradually. It's not necessarily instantaneous, although it will occur in a relatively short period of time, and we're now starting that transfiguration. So that's very exciting. We're moving through the ascension process, and best of all, the American founding fathers put that prophecy on the dollar bill right here in our old friend, the Great Seal of the United States. What is this? This annuit septis actually means the year begins. Annu, annual, septis, conception. The Latin is very straightforward, and it means birth of the year. Novus Ordo Seclorum means new secular order. But as you're going to see, that is a quote from something else. So let's talk about that quote. We learned what Novus Ordo Seclorum is quoted from Charles A.L. Totten, who is a Civil War hero. This is him as a young man, and then this is him as he gets older, looking disturbingly similar to Sigmund Freud. What's up with that pointy devil beard? I don't know. Anyway, you know this guy is a big insider because when he writes a letter to the Secretary of the Treasury, he actually gets marked down in history for having written that letter. So he wrote the letter to the Secretary of the Treasury, Charles Folger, on February 10th, 1882, and said, Novus Ordo Seclorum is a quotation from Virgil's fourth eclogue. And Virgil borrowed it from the mystic Sibylline records. Now, what the heck are the Sibylline records? That's the next stage of our investigation. We have to find out the answer. Here is the Sibyl of Cumae. She was considered the greatest psychic in the history of humanity. Her books were channeled, and she became known as the greatest psychic in all time. Her books became the greatest treasure in the history of Rome. The story of how the Roman king got her books is very interesting because he rejected her the first 2 times, and she burned 3 volumes of these books each time. Only at the end, on the 3rd time, her legend as a psychic had grown so huge that he accepted the books and paid her 9 bags of gold, which is a tremendous amount of money, that had to be hauled out on donkeys to carry the bags. But it was worth it because he found that her prophecies predicted events in Roman history before they happened and told you when they were going to happen. So the first thing they did when they got these books is look up the future and say, my gosh, there's going to be a flood coming up in the spring, we don't know what it is, but it says that everybody's going to be starving. So the king says, well, I know what we're going to do. We'll lock away all the grain and we're going to lock away that silo, because if our food is missing, we're not going to allow anybody to steal it. So they lock it away, they put everybody on austere rations, and at the end of the season, they open up the vault where all the grain is supposed to be, and it's flooded. And the grain has gone to blight. And now it's all destroyed, and you can't eat it, and the prophecy came true. Now, do you remember that scene in The Matrix where they meet the Oracle, and what does she say? And don't worry about the vase. What vase? And he turns around, remember, and he knocks into the vase, and he knocks it over. And then she goes, now what's really going to bake your noodle is, would you have broken it if I hadn't have said anything? Now think about that. What was she really saying right there? She was saying that his warning, that actually hearing the prophecy made it come true. That is a holdover from the insiders from this Roman legend of the Sibyl of Cumae. Now, what did she say? Although these prophecies were considered so highly accurate over time, they locked it away. That's another thing I want to point out first, is that her prophecies were kept hidden in a vault, the Roman equivalent of Area 51. They built this thing called the Temple of Jupiter on the highest hill in Rome called Capitoline Hill, 5 levels of security guards. You could not get in there, and then even if you got in, you still had to get through locked chambers to get to these books, because they knew that their sworn enemy, such as Carthage, which was a comparable kingdom back then, if Carthage got their hands on this, oh my God, they could wipe Rome out, because every time Rome had some big disaster, it was predicted in the book. It's interesting that the prophecies didn't help Rome out. These prophecies, they finally got to the point that they locked it up and they wouldn't even read it unless there was already a grievous national emergency, because it was like the leprechaun wish. Be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. Like there's the classic story of, well, I wish I could see through women's clothing. And then you see into their organs and you're like freaking out. You don't get to see them naked, you see the body inside. Ah! So that's the same idea here. It was like the leprechaun wish. So the prophecy didn't help the Roman Empire, but it got their attention. And what got their attention the most was that these prophecies continued through the time that we're in right now. And if they were that accurate back then, why would they stop being accurate now? The prophecies continued, and the ultimate point here is that this quote that you're looking at right here, the mighty order of ages is born anew, that is what the dollar bill quote comes from. That is what Charles A. L. Totten told us. Novus Ordo Seclorum is a shortened form of this. A mighty order of ages is born anew. Now, that means the 25,000-year cycle. In context, it's very obvious. Both the prophetic virgin and Saturnian kingdoms now return. Who the heck is that? We're not talking about people here. Virgo and Saturn, we're talking about extraterrestrials. We're talking about the gods. And that will become more obvious as we go on. Let's read a little more. A new progeny is let down from the lofty heavens. What? What is a progeny? Progeny is an offspring. A new offspring. Lofty heavens, the word heaven often is translated to mean outer space. in any document from that time, including the Bible, and that's something we're going to get into in future episodes. But a new progeny, a new offspring, comes down from outer space. This is talking about a very big change. This is talking about a coming new age, hence the term new age, the age of Aquarius, the change into this new cycle. It's not all bad. A lot of the Christians out there think that anything having to do with this stuff has got to be evil, but it's in their religion as well. It's in Christianity. The boy is soon to be born, in whom the iron age shall come to an end, and the golden one shall arise again in the whole earth. Now this is on the dollar bill. The United States dollar bill is showing you this. And it gets even better. Because if the golden one is going to arise again in the whole earth, what happens to the earth when this occurs? Now this is not just talking about one person. This is not a messianic return. This is everybody on earth transforming into something more. So let's read. Whatso tracks remain of our old wickedness, once done away, shall free the earth from never ceasing fear. That sounds pretty amazing. We're talking about an age where we are no longer under the grips of financial tyranny, where these cabals are not affecting us. We are free from that stuff. That's what the prophecy is saying is going to happen, coordinating with the return of the gods and us transforming to be like them, as you see in the next quote here. He, meaning the boy soon to be born, in whom the gods shall appear again, the golden one shall arise again in the whole earth. That boy shall receive the life of gods, and we will see heroes and gods commingling, and he himself will be seen as a god. Whew. Wow. This is on the US dollar? And nobody talks about this. That's why it needed to be on Gaiam TV. I'm not going to get this on NBC. I'm not going to get this on Discovery Channel because, well, maybe Discovery Channel, but they're not ready for the truth just yet because we haven't allowed our media to speak the truth. The cabal has been controlling and pulling the strings. But the original founding fathers of the United States were not necessarily negative. They put this prophecy in there because they knew this was going to be happening and they wanted to tell us about what was going to happen. And as it says at the end, with his Father's worth, he, meaning all of us as we've been transformed, will reign over a world in peace. Now, it's very important to point out that the founding fathers believed that this would be the ascension. And we can demonstrate that conclusively. When Washington died, George Washington died, they drew him ascending at the end of his life. Get a load of this now. This is him rising up into the heavens on his little cloud here. He's got the hand gesture of the gods, and here are the gods putting the garland on his head, which symbolizes now that he can open his pineal gland and create a stargate that he can travel through. And over here you see some of the earlier founding fathers who have already ascended. So there he is, getting his wreath, getting his ascended wreath, and the founding fathers encouraging him to go forward. Now here is another statue that was created in which we see George Washington looking a little suspiciously more ripped than I think he probably was in real life. You got a dude with wooden teeth. Check out the physique on this guy. I mean, he's buff. Okay, now I highly doubt that that's actually what George Washington looked like in real life. Call me crazy, but I don't think so. So here he is holding that sword, as you see, because he's become Zeus. He's become the embodiment of the main god in the Greek pantheon. This is not insignificant stuff here. Now, this next shot is a diagram from Manly Palmer Hall's book, in which we see George Washington ascending, and he's now up in heaven with the gods, which are drawn here with wings, but he has become a god. That's part of their prophecy. Now also, who the heck is this dude? You see this guy over here standing? You notice the woman who's bowing in fealty to him over here? He is much taller than everybody else in the room, as you can see very clearly here, and look at what's going on over his throne It's the double-headed Illuminati eagle. Oh my goodness. They put it right out there in front of you. They're not hiding anything here. They're showing you that this process has been watched over by human extraterrestrials who in this case happen to be taller than everybody else in the room. Very, very interesting. Now, in this next slide, I want to point out that I have no intrinsic difficulty with same-sex relations. It's okay for one dude to hold another dude. You know, now, I don't do that. It's not my thing. But if you want to get into that, that's okay. But Uncle Abe and good old Georgie Washington, he didn't just cut down that cherry tree. He might have lied about that, but then he revealed he had to tell the truth. Well, here he is having a very bi-curious experience with Uncle Abe. Wow. But this is because Uncle Abe ascended at the end of his life, and they put the wreath on him as well, and the angels are watching overhead. Now, all of this comes together when we see the U.S. Congress. This is something that William Henry, a wonderful researcher, has put this together, and I'm sharing it with you because I think it's so important that everybody's got to know. William Henry has talked about the Capitol Dome of the U.S. Congress. Now that dome is built to look like the pineal gland. That's one of the big secrets that you don't know. The third eye, the open pineal gland. But when you walk up the stairs and you go inside, you look inside the dome and this is what you see. These windows over here correspond to what you see right up here. So that's what we're looking at. There is a painting on the ceiling, and there's also what's called a fresco, a painting along the side of scenes from American history. This guy is what we're concerned with because you see this ring. It looks like a Stargate. It looks like a portal. And then inside the ring is a painting, and there is George Washington with all the gods and goddesses. Here's the sign, E pluribus unum, from many comes one, and he is portrayed on a rainbow, holding his hand in the gesture of the gods with his other hand on the sword, symbolizing that he's become Zeus again. He has become one of the gods, and this is closely mirroring an existing painting that they already knew of back when this was done, of Jesus on the rainbow, which indicates again that he has ascended. Even the halos around Jesus' body here correspond to the halos that are implied. You see this circle right here? Isn't that something? And you see the rings. It's the same thing that we see right here. They did that on purpose to indicate that they believed that George Washington had ascended. And guess what the name of that painting is called? It's called the apotheosis of George Washington. What does apotheosis mean? Man becomes God. Now, there are some fundamentalist Christian researchers who have taken all this and said, oh my God, it's all evil. George Washington became Apollo, he became Lucifer, it's all Luciferian, it's evil. But the prophecy said everybody's going to be turning into this, and it's mirrored in the Bible. Jesus in John 14:12 said, as I do these things, so shall you do them, and greater things, for I go unto my Father. Now, the rainbow body legend is not just a legend. It's not just Jesus with the Shroud of Turin and what might be a photographic negative of his body, as we talked about before. It's literally the rainbow body legend, in which we're seeing these people in Tibet, 160,000 documented on record, where this is what it looks like as they ascend. They literally just transform into rainbow-colored light. And we see multiple images of this amazing psychedelic kaleidoscope of color that happens to you in the ascension process. This is a spontaneous transmutation of the physical body. Now, here's the next thing. You notice this ring that we see here around the painting? You see these stars here? Well, you probably can't see it too well. Maybe in post we can zoom in on close on these stars, but each one of them has 5 points. And also, each one of these little guys here is a pine cone, the pineal activation. How many of these are there? We know there's 72, and then we got to look at the points. There's 5 points on each one. That gives us a total of 360 points, right? Now, let's take that number and let's multiply it by the total number of stars that we see. So we've got, now we're finding, okay, we got 360 points, 360 star points. Now let's multiply them by the total number of circles. That's the Masonic secret clue in the apotheosis of George Washington. Oh my goodness. 72 times 360 is 25,920, which is the magic number of years that it takes us to do the great year. The big cycle that everybody was so excited about. There it is. And then just to make the point even more clear, here we have the fresco along the side of scenes from American history, such as the scene that became Thanksgiving, Squanto the Indian making peace with the Pilgrims. But what we also see is this. This is the moment that Cortez was greeted by Montezuma as a god. Notice Montezuma's hand gesture is the gesture reserved for the gods. What's that behind Cortez? The Aztec sunstone, which indicates the end of the Mayan calendar. They know when this thing is going to happen. They know what is going to happen. And if you still don't believe me, here's a piece of data discovered by Richard C. Hoagland. The Air Force One airplane that Kennedy was flying, they changed the serial number for Kennedy into 26,000. Isn't that strange? And we have multiple pictures of it. There's a picture of 26,000. There's Kennedy walking. You can see 26,000 in the background. Here he is coming down off the stairs. There's 26,000 up at the top right. And even worse, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who's now widely believed to have been Kennedy's real assassin, needed to be sworn in on Air Force One, serial number 26,000, with his wife right next to him. LBJ also had Kennedy's Oval Office redone in scarlet blood red curtains and carpeting. And Kennedy hated the color red, and he had that done over the weekend when Kennedy left for Dallas while he was shot. Unbeknownst to Kennedy, LBJ had that done. The Air Force One symbolizes the phoenix. It symbolizes the transmutation that we go through, and they put the number 26,000 on the tail of the plane, as you can see very clearly here in its display. So what are these guys up to? They know something's going on. They know it's the end of 26,000 years, and the big final clue was discovered by Raymond Mardicus, where we look at the actual levels of the pyramid, and we find that the Mayan Katun of 19.7 years is counted from the 1776, because you start with the last year of the cycle in Mayan numerology, so it's 1756 to 76. 13 courses brings you up to 2012. After 2012 is when they know that this is what's going to happen. During that time that they visited Mesoamerica, they were using a 13 Katun system to count, as you see right here. And here's the frickin' Templar cross right up at the top. So that is a cipher. It's a cipher from the Sibylline mystery text, which they quoted at the bottom. That at the end of the age, we will become beings of light. It doesn't happen instantaneously. That's what we've obviously figured out, because the Mayan calendar came and went, nothing happened. But what we see also is in these early prototype drawings of the Great Seal of the United States, it's not an eagle. It's a phoenix. There's the tuft on the back of the head. Notice the scales, because it's the bird of fire. The long, long legs. Benjamin Franklin wanted it to be the phoenix, and he got voted out. But here's the stargate that it forms. It's going through. There's the garland of the laurel wreath and the symbol of the pineal gland opening, the pyramid transfiguration. So something is definitely going on here. Something is happening. And it seems very likely that these changes that we're experiencing right now are literally the fulfillment of the Ascension prophecy. Now, I've shared a lot of information with you here. This week's wisdom teaching is something is going on. You have not been told the truth. This is considered a Masonic secret. It has been kept hidden from you by the Masonic order for a reason. Because they now think they're the only ones that are going to go through this. They're creating their New World Order the new American century, they needed the catastrophic event, i.e. 9/11, Project for New American Century. We need a catastrophic and catalyzing event similar to Pearl Harbor. They wrote that in September 2000. September 2001, something big happened. The towers came down. They wanted to enact control, thinking they're the only ones that are going to ascend. That's not true. Now, I'm telling you that these prophecies have been widely misconstrued. Everybody is going to go through this, and that includes you. It includes me. And these wisdom teachings are designed to help you know what you need to do to be prepared for the ascension. Next week, we're going to start talking about those prophecies in even more detail. I'm David Wilcock. This is Gaiam TV. Thank you for watching. Wisdom Teachings with David Wilcock. That's me. This is Gaiam TV. Welcome to another amazing episode, taking you down the rabbit hole. We are not taking the blue pill here. This is the red pill, gateway to the matrix of the universe, which is not some simulation of computers, but is actually, in fact, the source field, the unified consciousness that the universe is made of. It's the living cosmos, a living universe that creates all physical matter, creates everything that we know. Send in your questions. We're doing a series of episodes at the beginning in order to get a storehouse built up. But once we get rolling, once we've done maybe 15 episodes, we're going to start to have your questions put in the show here. By you being a member of Gaiam TV, you get access to over 5,000 metaphysical spiritual titles. You get to see weekly television shows, of which this is only one. There's also Beyond Belief with George Norrie. There's plenty of stuff to see here that's really cool. And it's a low monthly fee, similar to Netflix, or when you used to need to have cable, which of course with the internet now we don't need cable TV anymore. But this is different. You pay a little bit, but you get premium quality content, and you're going to be on my screen. If we pick your question, your video will be uploaded, and we're actually going to have you ask me the question on this screen. And that way it becomes a co-creative show, but there are certain things that I need to lay in as a foundation. It's taking a series of episodes for me to get there, to get to the point of the wisdom teachings and what they're really about. Now, last week I talked about the coming golden age, and I was also talking about how that actually translates as golden race. And I said that there are mythologies from all over the world that were given by the gods, and they encoded this secret message. These two historians, Santian and Van de Shen, very professional, cutting-edge, peer-reviewed journals that they wrote their studies for, until they wrote Hamlet's Mill, proving, in fact, that there was information encoded in these myths from all over the world regarding this weird thing called the precession of the equinoxes, which is a slow counter-rotating wobble in the Earth's axis that takes 25,920 years to complete and changes the position of the stars in the night sky on the equinox, hence precession meaning movement of the equinoxes. Every 72 years they're going to move by 1 degree. That's been going on all along. It's part of what happens. And we now know that the real cause of precession is that we're orbiting another star. This was discovered by Walter Cruttenden, as I've said, proving that we live in a binary solar system. He's got a lot of evidence that really shows that, which I give in my all-weekend events. But here in this TV show, we got to keep it short and sweet. His book, Lost Star, talks about that black sun, as some people have called it, which I believe is going to be a brown dwarf. And we're orbiting this, and the speed changes over time, as I've been saying. So here it gets slower, And then as we go towards it at the end of the age, end of the 25,000-year cycle of orbit, it goes faster, meaning that we're moving through more space, meaning that we're moving through more source field energy, so we're going to get a vibrational increase. We're going to get changes not just in what we think of as normally being the golden age, but also changes in the planets. And that's what we're going to get into in this episode, interplanetary climate change and how that all relates. Now, the ancient myths used often the metaphor of the grain mill, where the axle of the mill represents the Earth's axis and the spinning of the millstone represents the rotation of the Earth. The millstone actually is grinding out qualities of food that gets worse and worse over time, and eventually the whole axle breaks. And that's when we get thrown into the golden age. The gods, Frida and Freya, which could represent two stars, actually save the day. And again, all these prophecies, these are all the major world myths. It's over 30 of them. So it includes everything. They all say that it leads to a golden age. Isn't that something? And I talked about the founding fathers of the United States of America putting a prophecy in the Great Seal of the United States, with Novus Ordo Seclorum statement being deciphered by Charles A.L. Totten, a Civil War hero, who in 1882 deciphered Novus Ordo Seclorum in a letter that he wrote to the Secretary of the Treasury, Charles Folger, in which he said that Novus Ordo Seclorum is quoted from Virgil's Sibylline records. Now, Virgil was given the authority to copy over the Sibylline mystery text by the Roman government, which up until that point had been kept very secret because they were highly accurate prophecies given by this woman, the Sibyl of Cumae. She was the best psychic of all time. She would put these prophecies out on oak leaves at the front of her cave, and people would come up and read them, and if nobody came to read them, they would just blow away. So now people are camping out outside the caves because there's over 130 entrances to this cave complex she lived in. This was near Mount Vesuvius. Now these caves would give off volcanic gas called ethylene, which is a psychedelic. And then she'd also take drops of bay laurel juice. Now please don't try this at home, and if you do, I assume no legal liability. But she got into a psychedelic trance state which gave her access to the gods, hence she channeled 9 books, burned the first 6 in 2 visits, 3 on the first visit, 3 on the second visit, when she visited the Roman king, King Tarquin. Tarquin said, I don't want these books for 9 bags of gold. I don't care what's in them. That's way too expensive. She says, okay, fine. Lights them on fire. Only the 3rd time, the priests are begging him, please, please, we'll give you everything we've got. Just buy the frickin' books. I don't care what you have to do. Just buy the book, please. The king says, okay, give her the 9 bags of gold. The books became considered the most valuable treasure in the history of Rome. So valuable that this entire room around me filled with gold wouldn't be enough. They spent hundreds of years trying to figure out how to re-channel the 6 books that they missed, because the prophecies of the future were so accurate. And as I said, they didn't give the Romans any special benefit. They didn't get any edge off of these prophecies. The prophecies would actually become self-fulfilling. If you read about a certain disaster, the disaster comes true because you tried to prevent it. Classic example being prophecy of a famine. They hide all the grain away to try to stop the famine. The grain goes to blight because of a flood. It all rots, and then the famine happens because they hid the grain away. And that's like in the scene in The Matrix when he knocks over the vase and she says, would you have broken it if I hadn't have told you, don't worry about the vase? Another classic example. Okay, so all this comes together with what her prophecy said about our time, because it continues forward and it says, a new progeny is let down from the lofty heavens as the mighty order of ages is renewed, meaning the 25,000-year cycle. A new progeny comes in. The Virgin and Saturnian kingdoms return. That's talking about the gods. And the golden one shall be born and arise again in the whole earth. It's talking about everybody changing into this golden age, or the golden race, if you will, since that's the same word. The earth will be freed from wickedness and fear. This is not the Roman Empire. This is not the Illuminati. This is freedom from all that stuff. And we shall receive the life of gods, and we will commingle with the gods and be seen as the gods ourselves. That's very exciting. And the Father's worth, the Father, Mother, God out there in the universe, will reign over a world at peace. We will be a peaceful planet. So, of course, the Founding Fathers, as I said, believed that they would ascend through basically helping form America. The principles of freedom in the American Constitution correspond to the teachings that we need to be able to ascend. We cannot have this religious stricture constraining us from being able to seek the truth for ourselves. So you see here how he's given the Stargate portal capability. He now can open a Stargate with his pineal gland, and the angels are giving him that capability, and he was portrayed becoming like the god Zeus. And we also talked about the U.S. Capitol, the dome indicative of the pineal gland, and in the roof of the dome we have this painting, which literally is the apotheosis of George Washington. He is portrayed ascended. He's sitting there on this rainbow, just like this painting of Jesus, indicating they believed that Washington had ascended, and it was literally called, the painting is called the apotheosis of George Washington, meaning man becomes God. And it gets even better because this rainbow body legend, as I said, exists throughout all kinds of ancient mythologies. There's over 160,000 written, documented cases of the name and everything of when this happened in China and India alone, and Tibet. So this is a big deal. This is a story that's been going on for a long time, where people can ascend and transmute into light. And that seems to be a natural function of being human when you're ready for it. The people who did this, the teaching is when no other thought can enter your mind but love, that's when you're ready. That's when you can do this. And we're going through a transitional process as a planet right now to make it so that everybody is ready for that. The number of stars that we see is 72. Each star has 5 points, and you multiply all that together, you get 360 points. Then we multiply that by the total number of stars, and we get the magic number once again, 25,920, corresponding to the wobble in the Earth's axis, the big cycle as we orbit this companion star. Very exciting. And just to recap, this fresco on the side has scenes from American history, like the one from Thanksgiving where we made peace with the Indians. And here, Cortez is meeting Montezuma for the first time. Montezuma gives him the gesture indicating that he's in the presence of a god. And look at what he's pointing at. The pineal gland flame with the Kundalini serpent, and behind him is the Aztec sunstone calendar, indicating that they know when this thing is going to happen. It's the end of the Mayan calendar. 2012 is when it starts. Also, as I said, Air Force One, 26,000 on the tail of the plane. John F. Kennedy's plane. He was the sun god. He was Horus. He was in the phoenix. The bird of the plane is the bird of fire, the bird of the phoenix. And then when LBJ assassinated Kennedy, he insisted on being sworn in on Air Force One with the vanquished queen next to him, Jackie Kennedy. Very tragic that this was done, but this is them playing around with the symbolism and putting it right out in front of the public, knowing and laughing that the public is too stupid to come up with the secrets of the Illuminati. Why did they put this symbol on the dollar bill? What is that weird eye in the triangle? It symbolizes the pineal awakening. And we see the cipher in the pyramid in which there's 13 courses corresponding to these ages called katuns in the Mayan calendar. So the Mayans count the last year of the cycle is the number they give it. So 1776 is the last year in the katun. So you have 13 cycles which take you from 1756, 1776, 96, 1815, ding, 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 ding. Notice this is really nicely close to World War I. This is really close to when they confiscated the world's gold and the rise of Nazi Germany. 1953 is the end of the Korean War. 1973 is Watergate. 1993 would be the final era as we enter into this golden age, which is predicted to come in 2012. It's right there in the Mayan calendar, leading to, boom, pineal gland awakening as the great year comes to completion. The 13 Katun cycle was counted by Mesoamericans during the time of colonial United States. as you can see right here in this illustration. So this was something that they knew. This is a very complex symbol. Look at all the symbolism. They're quoting from a document down here. Charles A.L. Totten gave you what the quote means. That it means the golden one shall arise again in the whole earth. The gods return. That's in the Sibylline mystery text. She's telling you that's what's going to happen. And it's the gods using her as an instrument. She ingested these psychedelic compounds, breathed the volcanic gases, and that gave her the visionary ability which allowed them to use her to speak through. And that can be done for positive purposes. The Quran, the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. I mean, this is what people did. This is how they got information. She's just another example of somebody who got it very, very accurately. Now, they also say that we're going to turn into the bird of fire, the phoenix. What's that mean? That's the transmutation of the body. That's burning your body down into pure light, basically. It's this ascension flame, and then reconstituting your body. The disappearance and reappearance of the phoenix corresponds to the ascension. Franklin wanted it to be the phoenix. He got voted out. Now, they're saying that something big is going to happen at the end of the age, and I knew way back when I encountered these prophecies in the 90s that if something this big is really going to happen, if we're going to go through this, what they're basically calling a dimensional shift, then there has to be incredible science that can prove that that's going to happen. And that, my friends, is interplanetary climate change, which is NASA's hottest secret. Indeed it is. When I did this image back years ago, I didn't even realize why I put this little guy in there, but that's the companion star, and I only realize this now. At the time I was saying, oh, it's the center of the galaxy, but it's not. I had actually drawn the companion star psychically years before I knew what I was actually going to discover. Now that's an actual scale model of the sun compared to the planets. The sun contains 99.86% of all the mass in the solar system. It's huge. The planets are just little specks of sand by comparison. This interplanetary climate change is the smoking gun of the Mayan calendar end date, the 2012 scholarship. We're past the 2012 date. So this stuff becomes very important now. I'm going to take you through a guided tour now of studies from NASA. Remember, NASA was created as a defense agency of the United States government. Look up their charter. And it said that they could classify anything that they find for national security if it's inimical to national security, which of course means inimical to the state secrets of Freemasonry, which is part of the government. It's a Masonic symbol that you're looking at right there. So now let's check this out first of all. This is a combined graph of all different core samples from the Earth's ice caps, which combine together to show us that the solar activity is the highest it's been in, oh my God, how did he do that? You want to see that again? I know you do. Let's try it one more time. Ah, yes, it works. 8,000 years. It's incredible. How did we get to this point? The sun is so big that it's going to do stuff to all the planets as it gets hotter and hotter, and that's exactly what we see. I struggled on Mercury for years and years, but finally in 2008, the Messenger space probe went past Mercury and found magnetic pressure. It had actually grown a magnetic field that it didn't have in the 1970s when other space probes went by, like Mariner 10. The magnetic field had significant pressure in several areas, as we see here. A year later, they go back and they find magnetic tornadoes, which didn't even exist in 2008. So this is a massive change. And all the places that you see on the right that are blue are the changes in the magnetic field of Mercury that were not there when Mariner 10 went by. Now let's go to Venus. And again, I'm only giving you some highlights of a much larger presentation. Venus had a 2,500% increase in the green night side glow just between 78 and 99. And this is a NASA-based study from SRI International. This green stuff is oxygen. The atmosphere is changing and having more oxygen in it, and it's glowing on the night side. Mars did not used to have clouds, and now it's got clouds and ozone. Just from 75 to 97, they showed up out of nowhere. Mars is also having global warming, where the ice caps are melting from year to year, and it's actually being called global warming by NASA. But there's no SUVs on Mars, my friends. At least nothing that's publicly acknowledged. But who knows? I think if they had cars over there, it's probably not going to be running on gas. Anyway, then we also see an enormous dust storm that appears on Mars. Check this out. If this happened on Earth, it would be the end of life as we know it, occurring between June 26th and September 4th, 2001. Now, what's that date really close to? 9/11. It appears that the planet of war is having some telepathic conduit with us, and this is a big discussion that I'm not scientifically proving here, but in my new book, Synchronicity Key, I do. That we can extend our consciousness backwards in time. Time is not linear, and events that happen in one cycle can affect another cycle. Here, it seems that we went back in time just a little bit because everybody on Earth is freaking out, and it actually affected Mars very directly. Jupiter grew this donut of energy around the planet, which is called a torus of plasma, and it wasn't even there before 1974. Then, between the years 1979 and 1995, this torus increases in density by 200%. And in typical scholarly detachment, NASA says, yeah, it's stronger than expected. Right. I mean, come on, this is huge. A 200% increase in the density, it's incredible. A 50% increase in the density of each individual particle, yeah, it exceeded our expectations. No big deal. It is a big deal. This is a huge planet, and there's this massive tube of energy growing around it in just a few years. It wasn't there before. Now check this out. These volcanic, well, they're not volcanic. These are heat vents on the surface of Jupiter. They disappeared. There was 3 of them. They turned into 1 just in 3 years' time. And this guy, Dr. Philip Marcus, believed that it would cause 18 degrees of global warming on Jupiter in only a decade. And he was right, because he published that in 2000, and then here in 2008, there's raging thunderstorms, which they're calling a global upheaval on Jupiter. Check out those arrows, those hot spots. That's white on the infrared scale. That's very, very bright. And they'd never seen anything like it before. They're calling it a global upheaval. They say the cause has yet to be explained, and it says that in order to simulate this, you have to crank up the water vapor 300% more than what Galileo measured in 1995. So these red storms are signaling a massive climate change, and that also, once again here, it says that the temperature may be increasing by up to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's a huge, huge transition. The closest moon to Jupiter is Io, and Io's ionosphere is the charged particles in the atmosphere. That ionosphere has gotten 1,000% higher up off the surface, from 73 to 96. Yeah, it's unexpected. I mean, come on, you guys. The surface of Io got over 200% hotter. The entire moon, 200% hotter? That's crazy. That happened from 79 to 98. And they are surprised, and they cannot explain it. At least finally we get some authentic lifelike reactions out of these guys. Then Europa, the moon, this is what it was supposed to look like based on existing observations, but when they turned the Hubble Space Telescope on it, this is a photograph of what they saw. It's glowing like mad. I found this in the book Jupiter, which is an enormous book and it's expensive, of all these different scientific studies of the planet Jupiter and its satellites. Ganymede is the next one, 200% brighter in its brightness from 79 to 95. That's 16 years. Things are really cooking here. The solar system is going nuts, and its atmosphere got 1,000% denser during the same time. You're starting to see a pattern here. This is all NASA stuff here. Saturn grew this plasma torus. See that red ring? That wasn't anywhere near as dense in 1981 as it was 12 years later in 93. It grew 1,000% denser. Crazy. And now they found yet another one that's even bigger than that. They didn't even see it before. And now, as you can see in this diagram, it just showed up. This is a photograph that they could have taken well before 1995. If you could see in infrared, that's what it would look like. That stuff that you see down here, that wasn't there in infrared photos prior to 1995. It just showed up in 95. It's like the planet's on fire. It's heating up so much. And in 2004, we see this massive burst of X-rays that comes out from near the equator of Saturn. It's a huge burst at the magic 19.5 degree point, the geometric point, which I talk about in my all-weekend events. Now, Saturn had a storm that started only just a couple of years ago. Massive. Check this thing out. This is another one of these ones that just was mind-blowing, and it was after I wrote the source field book that this happened. We're looking at this, and we're seeing this incredible disturbance that starts like that, and it quickly spreads all throughout 2/3 of the northern hemisphere of the planet. And it was all over the media. Look at this. You see this band that's now covered everything that's visible to us here on Earth. They cannot explain why this is happening, but something is going on. Something very interesting is happening on Saturn. Here's a series of time-elapsed photographs showing the progress of this incredible storm. Now, look, we've been looking at Saturn with telescopes for a long, long time. Ever since the invention of the telescope, everybody wants to look at it. You get that, you see those rings, it's like, oh yeah, there's Saturn. Nobody's ever seen anything like this before. If they did, it would have been documented. It hasn't ever been seen before. This is a huge, huge change. And they're calling it a massive storm on Saturn. And there's just lots and lots of data here. Let's read this. It says, this temperature spike is so extreme, it's almost unbelievable, especially in this part of Saturn's atmosphere, which is typically very stable. To get a temperature change of this scale on Earth, you'd have to go from the depths of winter in Fairbanks, Alaska, to the height of summer in the Mojave Desert. The storm grew so large by December 5th, 2010, that an equivalent storm on Earth would blanket most of North America from north to south and wrap around the planet many times. That's very, very interesting. Something really big is going on in the solar system. This is our backyard. You live here. This is not just, oh, well, that's just NASA stuff. It's your life. It's my life. Something's happening to the energy around us. Something's changing us in a very fundamental way. Saturn's also got 100 times more ethylene gas than before. Well, we knew what happened to the Sybil of Cumae when she starts huffing ethylene gas. So Saturn's a pretty trippy place to be right now. Let's just put it that way. Here's another thing from CBS News. The huge Saturn storm is still surprising the scientists. They don't know what the heck to make out of this. Look at the amount of heat signature, especially there on the far right. That's all new stuff. This is very important, and the media hardly talked about it. And Voyager, when it went by Uranus in 1986, it was featureless as a cue ball, looked like green pea soup. No big deal. Then, now this is a false color image, so this would have been the same in the 80s. But what we're looking at is these little guys and these guys that led Dr. Eric Karkoschka to say really big, big changes hit by huge storms. Now this is crazy. I mean, when we see the progression, let's look at this. This is what it started out as, and this is what it turns into now. And especially when we go over here and we watch that, let's do that one more time, that fade in of where we start out with nothing and then look at all this stuff that starts growing on the surface of the planet. Pretty incredible. Then we go to Neptune. Neptune starts out in 1989 like this, and then between 1996 and 2002, this is 0 degrees of rotation, a quarter turn, half turn, 3/4 turn. Look at how much brightness increase there is. This is the overall average. It's like somebody turned on the light on a lampshade. So we start out here, then this is 1996. Now we're going to go up to 1998. And now we're going to go to 2002. Now look at how much that brightness is just, bam, popping in. It's incredible. Why did that not appear on the news? Well, you know why, because of the cabal. I just did it for you. But that's stuff that you're going to see on Gaiam TV, not out there in the mainstream media. Lastly, Pluto, the farthest planet from the sun, is drifting away from the sun, and yet it's had a 300% increase in atmospheric pressure from 1989 to 2002. This shows us Earth changes are not unique to the Earth. We're seeing continuous rise in earthquakes, 400% increase in earthquake activity on Earth from 73 to 98, 500% increase in volcanic activity from 1875 to 1993. Sorry, but the greenhouse gas model of fossil fuels is not enough to cause this. What does seem to be causing it is we're seeing galactic dust on the increase. I'll talk about that next episode. It seems to be the result of us orbiting this companion star. As we get close to it, we're getting into more energy here. We're moving faster. There's more energy, and it's charging up the solar system. And it's tweaking our DNA, making us into something more than human. Next week here on Wisdom Teachings with David Wilcock, IMTV, we're going to get into more detail about what this change is doing and how it affects you today. Thanks so much for watching. I'm David Wilcock. Welcome to Wisdom Teachings with me, David Wilcock. This is IMTV. Over 5,000 metaphysical titles, a virtual who's who of all the biggest names that we know and love in this field. It's all been brought together. This is the first time anybody's ever done that. And there's no censorship. I can talk about anything that I want, and we have an opportunity to get the truth out to you. A half an hour an episode. I'm giving you the cosmic download of stuff that used to cost $295 to see for a 16-hour weekend. I'm going to keep those weekends competitive. I'm still doing that, so you can come and see me in person. But you can also send in your questions when you're a GaiaMTV subscriber by going to my page, GaiaMTV.com/David Wilcock. Sign up for GaiaMTV, and then send us your questions. And if your question gets picked, you're going to be here on my screen. This is the last episode, episode 15, before we start bringing your questions in. And things can go in a lot of interesting different directions once we go there. But this is all the backstory. Now, I've been talking a lot about UFOs because it's very important to understand this is not woo-woo stuff, and it's not fringe. It's been very carefully concealed from you. The truth. The gods, or the extraterrestrial humans, are all over the galaxy. That's something that Sergeant Clifford Stone said at the Disclosure Project event on May 9th, 2001, at the National Press Club in front of the world's media. He said that there are 57 different varieties of extraterrestrial humans that the government has cataloged coming to the Earth, and he had a flip book so that if there was a crash, he could identify which type had crashed based on the ship and based on what they look like and know how to interact with them. The problem was that he would actually have a telepathic interaction with them when he went up to them after they crashed. And I was there on May 10th, 2001 at the closed executive summary briefing for VIPs and members of Congress, in which he got up there in front of congressmen, their aides, and top media professionals and told the story of meeting one of these beings and getting the telepathic download of its pain, which is just as bad as if your own leg had been chopped off, if that's what that being is feeling. And he broke down in tears. And he got a full, rousing standing ovation to come back on stage and finish his talk. Not one person in the audience was going, oh, I don't know if I believe this guy. So look, the truth is known. The people at the top level know it. Extraterrestrial humans are a classified secret. They have tried to lie to you by telling you that these beings are scary creatures. You'll notice they use that word a lot. Or aliens. Alien is essentially extraterrestrial racism, because we're not dealing with scary foreign beings. We're dealing with people who look a lot more like us than you might have ever thought. They've been watching over the earth for a long, long time. And we've seen them in many cultures. We see them in Egypt with these elongated skulls. This is Nefertiti. We see, or actually that's their daughter Meritaten. We see the evil god as well, Baal, wearing this weird brace which he used as a technology to be able to shoot thunderbolts out of his hand and to telepathically influence people. But notice he's got the elongated skull and this golden hat that he's wearing. We also see the Cycladic figurines, these 30 islands south of Greece, which clearly again have the skull shape even though they're a little bit stylized. In Africa we have the Dogon with these very large eyes on the head, as you can see here. In Australia we have the Wandjina, which look like the Greys. These guys show up in Peru. These skulls are much larger. Brian Forster recently found yet another one. This one still has some hair on the top of the head. I'm sorry, there's no way that you could bind the head of a child and make it into a skull that big. And this can be DNA tested. There is scalp residue on this skull. You can take a piece of that skin and test it. And all this work is being done now. These guys were found in Siberia, and the workers actually cried and quit because they were so scared, because they found multiple skeletons of beings like this in Siberia. As they did in South Africa, they've been found all over the world. This was in an area called Boskop. These are the Boskop skulls. And again, they're significantly larger than regular human skull. And I do believe we need to tilt that bone to make it so that it's more like the others. I think this for reconstruction is a little bit off. Then we see these little tiny people appearing in Russia and in Chile. This is what they look like when they're alive. And then when they die and they dry out, that's what the Russian one looked like. And we see that the bone plates at the top of the head are exactly the same as this little guy that was found in Chile. And the genetic testing of him has now been done for the movie Sirius, which is a disclosure film, bringing out the truth as of April 24th with Dr. Stephen Greer, with myself, with many of the top government whistleblowers who have never spoken before and are releasing their information for the first time in a very high production value film. I hope you'll see Sirius. These little guys showed up in Easter Island as the Kava Kava Moai ancestor sculptures, and even in modern Chile we see these little tiny people showing up. A kid found this, brought it home, he wounded it in the process of bringing it home in newspaper, it died, and this is what it looks like up close. So it's very, very tiny, but it looks almost like a bird. They might be derived from birds. Now these gods never left. They've obviously been living here, they've left their remains here, we see records of them in historic cultures, and they're still coming around. We see the Aurora crash 1897. 10 years later we saw Fatima, in which these 3 children in Fatima, Portugal, here they are, actually received visitations to try to stop World War I, the war to end all wars. This war was so bad that we had 42 million Allied soldiers die, 22.5 million killed, wounded, or missing, 25 million Central soldiers died, and another 16.5 million wounded or missing. Now, if these were evil extraterrestrials, if they were evil aliens, right, why would they care? But they did care, because they came to this area of Fatima, Portugal, and they built up on the 13th of the month over about half a year to the grand finale on October 13th, 1997, in which 90,000 people showed up. And the clouds were torn apart, revealing a vast expanse of blue sky, and people saw a disk of dull silver hovering there with luminous sharp edges where the sun would be. That's pretty incredible, because that's a UFO sighting, but it's 30 years before anybody had coined the term unidentified flying object or flying saucer, so they didn't know what to call it. They just called it the sun. But it was visible to the naked eye without blinding. It trembled and spun like a wheel of fire, and then the sun begins throwing off these incredible colors through the sky, lit up the whole sky for 4 minutes, then it stopped, and it starts again, and now the display is even more outrageous, even more colorful and breathtaking than it was before. And then the sun breaks loose and zigzags down to the surface of the earth. People start screaming because they think they're about to die. They're falling down on their knees, saying prayers because they don't want God, because they think this is God's miracle. They don't want God to kill them. So the sun then stops right before it's about to hit the people and then zigzags back up into the air again. So what happens in the aftermath of this, after 15 minutes, is that everybody's clothes were completely dry. 90,000 people were completely soaked to the skin from the pouring rain, but whatever technology was that was being used, they all got dried out. And in one of the previous sightings, we also saw what looks like flowers coming down, but they beamed out of existence before they hit the ground, suggesting some kind of holographic projection technology. So here's a photograph of the 90,000 people, or a small subset of them, witnessing this in the air. Then we come to World War II, which began September 1st, 1939, where Hitler declared war on Poland. And then it ends on September 2nd, 1945. 16 million plus Allied soldiers estimated to be killed, 45 million plus civilian deaths. It's an incredible amount. 8 million Axis soldiers killed and 4 million Axis civilian deaths. That's a very tragic number. And when the U.S. was about to enter into World War II, to fight Hitler, to fight Japan, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, very soon after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the ETs made their next big move. And this was less than 3 months after the U.S. entered World War II. So the ETs were trying to do the same thing for the U.S. that they did for Portugal, and that Virgin Mary sighting, even though it never called itself Virgin Mary, it said, "I will tell you who I am and where I came from." But then all the people saw was a UFO. They didn't get anything else, except there was that third secret of Fatima that's been kept secret. And as the show goes on, I'm going to tell you what that was. What I think it was, based on the fact that these ETs have continued to give us messages and say the same things. 3 months after U.S. enters World War II, the ETs have the Battle of Los Angeles. Now, what is this? This is the headline, as I said last time, where we see some kind of flying craft that appears over LA. You can see all the searchlight beams were on it. It wasn't moving very quickly. It was hovering over the air, and they're bombarding it with artillery fire. And here's a newspaper headline of where that was happening. This starts out with air raid sirens that began sounding as a large orange-colored craft slowly hovers over Los Angeles the night of February 24th. Witnesses report it looking like a jack-o'-lantern. The 37th Coast Artillery Brigade begins firing at 3:16 a.m., and they fire for almost an hour these anti-aircraft shells that weigh 12.8 pounds. It doesn't stop until 4:14 a.m. Over 1,400 shells were fired, obviously firing at something that was real. They weren't doing that for no reason. Normally people start the UFO history with Roswell. Battle of Los Angeles, 1942, was a lot earlier, right after the U.S. enters into battle against Japan. They didn't know what this was. They thought this was some kind of classified aircraft. But because of how many shells they fired, weighing nearly 13 pounds, buildings were damaged because the shells are falling out of the air. 4 or 5 people died from the shells landing in their homes and literally killing them. And then 3 people died of heart attacks. And there was a lady that came to one of my conferences who witnessed it that night and said it was terrifying. I mean, it sounded like the sky was ripping open. The sound of the artillery going off was incredibly loud. It woke up everybody. People were cowering in their homes. They're looking outside. They're seeing this thing. Millions of people saw this thing hovering over Los Angeles. And here's the actual photograph of what it looked like. Once again, you can see the shells pinging off of the electromagnetic field that it has around it to create a shield. Nothing could touch this ship at all. The shells had no effect whatsoever. It was just like flinging pebbles against the side of a cruise ship. Didn't do anything. And when you see the inverted image, there is a very clear image of a flying saucer inside. That is not an airplane. And based on the eyewitness reports of what people said they saw, this is what it looked like sometimes and then when it would start to power up the power system, the underneath would glow orange. Another interesting thing about this is that the actual War of the Worlds movie from 1953, if you take a look at it, you'll notice that it's exactly the same type of craft. The only difference that the filmmaker made is they put this little periscope up on top of it. But that footage was inspired by this Battle of Los Angeles sighting, because Los Angeles is Hollywood. So people saw this. All millions of people were looking up in the sky at this thing that everybody's firing at. They didn't know what this was, but it scared the bejesus out of everybody. And the government said, nope, nope, we're not in any danger. It didn't do anything hostile. All the damage to the homes was done by artillery fire, nothing else. But the Army did confirm that this was a real event. They did not say that it was swamp gas or anything like that. The air battle raged over Los Angeles. It never fired back. It never tried to hurt us. It started down here in San Diego, Long Beach area, and it drifted all the way up the coast and then eventually went out this way, and they fired at it the whole way up here. The witness I know was living down here at the time. She saw it when it first started to happen. She went outside and looked at it and said that it was an amazing sight. It was very, very obviously something flying, a craft of some kind. Now that hasn't happened. We haven't seen any other event in history where UFOs are getting fired at and causing such a big ruckus. But, now this is where it gets interesting. Only 2 days after the Battle of Los Angeles, we get a very exciting historical document that has been unearthed and declassified thanks to the heroic efforts of whistleblowers, and that has given us the knowledge that Franklin Delano Roosevelt sent a memo to the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, General George Marshall, and here is the memo. And I'm going to read you what it says. I have considered the material in possession of the Army that may be of great significance towards the development of a super weapon of war. 2 days after this happened. Consultation with scientists on the issue of finding practical uses for the atomic secrets learned from the study of celestial devices. What do you think he's talking about? 2 days after the Battle of Los Angeles, they knew this was a celestial device, meaning from outer space, right on that memo that's been declassified. And then, here's the bonus, this information must remain within the confines of state secrets. Isn't that something? Now, I've been told by high-level insiders that extraterrestrial humans have been directly interacting with presidents in the U.S. for a century. It did not start after Roswell. It did not start after we developed nuclear weapons. It started in the late 1800s, early 1900s. That's when extraterrestrial humans began appearing in the White House, talking to the presidents, and everything was kept classified. And they have been working this out. There's 5 major human races that apparently have been dealing with our government. And there was going to be a disclosure in 2009. President Obama was going to get on the air in late November 2009 and introduce us to these 5 beings. Now, that information leaked on the internet through Project Camelot. I was part of it. I didn't want to leak the date, but Bill Ryan and Kerry Cassidy both ended up saying the date. Now, they did that harmlessly. They just wanted the truth to be known by the public. But then what happened is there was interference. 5 different groups tried to stop that disclosure from happening. And then after it was thwarted, Obama was going to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And less than 24 hours before he receives the Nobel Prize, you see the Norway spiral. This crazy sighting of a spiral in the sky which turns into a black hole that opens up like you're opening a camera lens. Is that incredible or what? You've just seen a sighting that many, many people saw. It was photographed from many different angles, and on my website I showed the proof that that was caused by HAARP. Here's an illustration of HAARP and how HAARP can be used to make a very similar spiral. The pulsed magnetic and microwave technology that they're using in HAARP, a very high-level electromagnetic field, could create the Norway spiral. I was told by Dr. Stephen Greer, who heard this from a high-level general, that Obama was warned, if you tell the truth about the UFO phenomenon, we will create one of those that Air Force One is going to fly into. And then the year after Obama was going to do this disclosure, the event shows up on NBC, and there's a black president that looks just like Obama, and the very beginning of the show, they're about to do the disclosure announcement, they're about to go public, and then what happens? An airplane is flying towards them, and right before it's going to crash and kill them, just like 9/11, it gets portaled out. Just like they warned Obama, because that Norway spiral is a portal. They warned him, and they created the exact same thing and put it on television as a further threat not to go public and to disguise the truth of what he was going to do in fiction, so that anybody who tells the truth about how he tried to make disclosure, oh, you just watched the event. Well, no, we had that Project Camelot video out a year and a half before the event came on the air, and they copied exactly what we said. Now, did they just use us for inspiration? I don't think so. That show was very expensive. It was over $1 million budget per episode, and they ran it for an entire year. Let's get back into our storyline here, because there's a lot more to talk about. So 5 years later, the ETs made their next big move, and this occurred with the infamous Kenneth Arnold sightings. This was a pilot who sees 9 saucer-shaped objects flying at an incredible velocity, 10,000 feet above the ground, flying between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams in Washington State in broad daylight. He clocked their speed at an estimated 1,200 miles per hour. Now, this is his original drawing of what he saw. Notice the horseshoe shape, very similar to what people said they saw in the Battle of Los Angeles. That's a very important point. This is where the term flying saucers came from. People got really excited about this sighting. Because this was in the immediate aftermath of World War II, people were still jittery, so they didn't want it to be an invasion. It caused a lot of interest. And what happens is, 12 days after Kenneth Arnold saw flying saucers that actually were shaped like a horseshoe, William Rhodes in Phoenix, Arizona, on this ranch, he walks outside and he looks up into the sky. That's his front gate, and he sees this. These are photographs that he took, which you can actually see if you look over there on the right, the corona, the discharge around the ship. The same ship we see in the Battle of LA, the same ship we see in the Kenneth Arnold sightings 12 days earlier, and you can actually see some kind of electromagnetic halo around the ship. The Roswell crash was, guess what time? The very same night, just one state away in New Mexico. So they were flying around, and according to leaked documents, Roswell was shot down by a microwave pulsed radar system. The newspapers exploded with headlines saying the Air Force captured a flying saucer on a ranch in the region of Roswell. Here's another Roswell Daily Record headline of General Ramey emptying out the Roswell saucer. Now, okay, look, he didn't empty out a weather balloon. How do you empty out a balloon? The fragments that they ended up showing were not what was reported. There are many, many eyewitnesses that said this is what it looked like when it crashed. This is a forensic drawing based on original eyewitness reports. Here's another forensic drawing based on original eyewitness reports. All of those reports together have now linked up to create this image of what people said they saw, and it's actually even been turned into a model that you can buy from the Tester Model Company if you want to build your own. Now, the testimony said that inside the craft there were beings that looked like this, except they didn't have black eyes. That's the only part that's wrong. But notice their hands and notice the control panels. Their hands would actually go over these metallic cutouts for where their hands were supposed to go. The eyes are correct in this image. The keyboards are not. But the faces are right. This is what they looked like. They did not look like the Greys. It's a very important point. So what we see again is, look at their hands. They have 6-fingered hands on each side, and they're holding onto these control panels. Now this is an actual photograph of the original control panels that were found in the Roswell wreckage. You'll notice there's tiny, tiny little dots here, and that's where fiber optic cables came up. We got fiber optic cables from reverse engineering this ship. We got computer technology from reverse engineering this ship. They had silicon wafers on there with tiny little etchings in them. They were freaked out when they opened this up because there were no wires, no visible electronic components, only fiber optic cables and gigantic circuit boards. And it was from reverse engineering those that they got transistor technology, LEDs, lasers, all these different things, Teflon, Velcro, fiber optic cables, infrared night vision that they saw when they looked through the porthole. It's dark outside. They look through the window and they see everything glowing green. And they were able to back engineer this stuff. So a very short time after the Roswell crash, Motorola comes out with the first transistor that was solid state. So now you have a transistor radio, whereas before you needed this big old wooden cabinet because a transistor was a tube that was hot, and it had to use electromagnetic energy to make it switch between one or the other. Well, now they were able to do that inside a tiny little component, and that's what allowed radios to become much smaller. So the Roswell crash turns into a big, big cover-up. But before it did, we got all these headlines. RAAF captures flying saucer. Because again, people had heard about flying saucers just 12 days ago. Army reveals it has flying disc. Bulletin, possession of a flying disc was disclosed today by the Intelligence Office of the 509th Bomb Group of Roswell Army Air Base. Disc lands on ranch in New Mexico. Not a weather balloon, right? U.S. Army will examine a flying disc. This is from the UK. But then, only one day later, the fix comes in. Because we already had the FDR memo, didn't we? In 1942, what did he say? We have celestial devices, and we can learn atomic secrets from them and give us an advantage in war, and we can't tell the public the truth. So they throw the clamp down on everything, and they say that it's a weather balloon, which is ridiculous. This is what they tried to pass off as being a flying disc that Ramey was emptying out. Give me a break. Now notice that he's holding a piece of paper in his hands. This becomes very important in just a minute here, because in this photograph, researchers were able to find the original negative from the newspaper, and by zooming in on it, which you can't really see it too well here, but you can see it here, they were actually able to read the memo that he had, which talked about it being a flying disc. Right here, as you zoom in up close, is the word, the disc. That's part of what we see. It also says, and the victims of the wreck, and in the disc they will ship. This was done by David Rudiak in 2001. Incredible research that hardly anybody talks about, because nobody back in the 1940s ever thought that we'd have the ability to zoom in on the negative that much and then photographically enhance it enough that we could actually read it. And it also says here, and the viewing of the decoy you connected to thee. That's another interpretation of it. But then this list actually has a lot of stuff. RAAF acknowledges that a disc is next new find west of, and then it says down here, at location was a wreck near the operation of, and the victims of the wreck you forwarded to the aviators in the disc they will ship for A1 8th Army. Wright Air Force Base assesses airfoil at Roswell. CIC team said this misstates the meaning of the story. This is how they're trying to cover it up now. Late today, Next sent out PR of weather balloons. That's the cover-up. Better if they add land Raywin Cruise. So there's a whole cover-up that was done here. It clearly says top secret at the bottom. And this was all the reconstruction of the Roswell memo by David Rudiak in 2001. Pretty amazing stuff. Now, this guy is posed in a squatting position. And I've had insiders from the military tell me that they do that when they want to say that something is BS. because that's the position that you go into when you're doing that. That's an insider code for those who know it, that he was being forced to lie, and he knew it because he'd handled the disc himself. You can see that right there. So here's another guy posing with the wreckage, and of course, just for your edification, we were able to dig into some very secret government files because we've done a lot of research on this. And I'm going to show you something that hardly anybody has ever seen. This is a classified government document, a very secret document in which we have a classification of all the different types of ships that have been seen and what they really are when we look at them up close. Let's take a look. As you can see, weather balloon, weather balloon, weather balloon. Anytime you run into trouble, just bring up your handy U.S. Air Force aircraft identification chart. If you ever need to know what something is, you just look there and you'll see that it's all there laid out for you. So not everyone bought it. Here's what I want to end on today. 3 different newspapers published William Rhodes' photos. They connected the dots with the flying saucers Kenneth Arnold saw. And then guess what happens? They get the knock on the door. Intelligence officers confiscated his prints. They also went to his house and paid him a visit. They made him give up all of the negatives, all of the photographs. No one bothered to debunk William Rhodes or his photos. They simply made it disappear. So in case you ever thought that there was something really going on to this story, the rancher at Roswell said he was harassed, that he wishes he'd never told the truth. And remember, if even one UFO sighting is real, then that means that we are not alone in the universe. I'm David Wilcock. This is Gaiam TV, Wisdom Teachings, and thank you for watching. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Wisdom Teachings with me, David Wilcock. I'm really glad that you're still with us. I think there's a lot more to come that you're going to be really excited about. And believe it or not, we're now up to episode 16. It's been quite a journey already. And I've had some time since we did the last 15 episodes to hear your emails and to find out what it is that you want to know. So as I've said before, your questions are going to help determine what we actually talk about in this show. And of course, there's lots of different topics to discuss. And what the first 15 episodes have gone through is really fascinating stuff because we're dealing with the extraterrestrial presence, and we're starting to make a lot of linkage points here between energetic DNA, the idea of a galactic intelligence or a universal intelligence programming life to exist and to flourish because DNA appears to be a quantum wave. And then we see how human evolution on Earth may be a galactic design, and there have in fact been people visiting us all along, revered as gods in ancient traditions, and we've found archaeological evidence of them, we've found paintings of them, we've found descriptions of them in various sacred scriptures, and we've found anthropological evidence. We've found skeletons, skulls, and they've been DNA tested, including intact corpses of small beings, as we've been seeing in previous episodes. Altogether, when we consider this information, what we're looking at is a tapestry of knowledge that is quite vast. And it does get into some interesting subjects because we're dealing with some things that make people feel anxious. So the first question that we have here is a question that does tap into some of those areas that make people a little more anxious. We're going to talk specifically now about exopolitics. So this is our first video question, as we're about to see.
Hey David, I love the show. This is Justin from Brantford, Ontario, Canada. My question for you is in regards to exopolitics. I heard you kind of speak a little bit about that when you're on George Norrie's Beyond Belief show. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on any government treaties that we may have with ET, if any exist. And thanks.
Well, thank you. I think the first treaty you got to worry about is with that baby. That's screaming. I don't know, man. But, you know, we gave everybody 24 hours to get the video in, so that just made it all nice and quick. But government treaties with extraterrestrials, interesting subject, and exopolitics in general. Did this ever happen? We've clearly been seeing in previous episodes evidence that Fatima was an extraterrestrial contact, that it seemed to be intended to steer Portugal out of World War I and help bring World War I to a close. We saw the Battle of Los Angeles, which actually dissuaded the United States from being involved in World War II to some degree. And then we saw the Roswell crash. But there have been other events that have taken place as well. And it's all, I believe, part of this greater awakening that we're going through at this time. This pineal gland activation, you could call it that. You could call it the coming golden age. You could call it the energetic shift that we're going through at this time. But Eisenhower, in 1954, allegedly did have meetings with extraterrestrial beings at Holloman Air Force Base. The cover story that they used was saying that he had to have dental work being done. That allowed them to pull him out of the public eye. And in 1954, the good guys actually did show up. Now, we're going to meet them in a little while. We're going to meet some of these positive extraterrestrials that were showing up in the early 1950s. This meeting did apparently take place. This is a headline from Daily Mail. And as you can see here, it says that Eisenhower had 3 secret meetings with extraterrestrials. We don't use the word aliens because that's basically racist. This came out in February 2012 on Daily Mail, and it says ex-president met with extraterrestrials on 3 separate occasions at the New Mexico Holloman Air Force Base. Eisenhower and FBI officials originated the meetings by sending out telepathic messages. Now that's interesting, because that's saying that telepathy was used to set the meeting up. Now we're going to get the backstory on that in a little while. There's a lot that's been written about this story. And what we find is that extraterrestrials did meet with Eisenhower. There was a prearranged meeting. These were the Nordic type extraterrestrials. So they were tall. They apparently had blondish hair and blue eyes. No resemblance to who you're seeing right now, of course. But they said they were willing to help us. They were willing to step forward and help humanity. But what they wanted was a technology exchange that would include our making spiritual principles more widely known. They saw that there was a lot of fragmentation in religion, and they created the religions in the first place. They never intended for us to get all factionalized. As I've said in previous episodes, Jesus taught reincarnation. It was one of his greatest secret teachings. And all the other religions start to blend together a lot more when you start to see how similar they are, and that a lot of the differences or apparent differences were really only due to semantic translating problems and things like that. There's a lot of similarity. So, Eisenhower believed that we as a society were not ready to meet the extraterrestrials. He essentially rejected the deal and said, look, you know, we're not ready for this. Our people are not ready for this. We're going to have economic problems. We're going to have religious problems, social problems. In the Law of One material, they do refer to this failure to make an agreement. Now, the story gets a little more sinister at this point, because other ETs that were actually the bad guys showed up in future meetings that were obtained, and they offered something that the positive ETs could not, because the positive ETs were following the law of free will. What did the bad guys offer? Well, as the bad guys came into play and as secrecy started to clamp down more and more, this is where we get the Majestic 12 group. The Majestic 12 group, it is believed, is photographed here. This photograph is apparently a historical illustration of them meeting with Eisenhower. And the Majestic 12 group created a treaty with the extraterrestrials. This is according to the work of Dan Burrish. And the Tau 9 treaty apparently is when this all happened. The first Tau 9 treaty was signed originally in 1958. And that was 4 years after the Holloman Air Force Base landings. These extraterrestrials allowed for abductions in their treaty. They said, look, we're going to take people, we're going to conduct tests on them, we want to take genetic samples. They told our government that their race was dying out and that they needed genetic material from us in order to help them survive. Now, this is where the story gets strange, because apparently they are us in the future. And that's what they told our government now. They told our government that they time traveled from the future to get here. And apparently the two big points they came from were 45,000 years in the future and 52,000 years in the future. And from those points, they came back in time and materialized in our reality, wanting to have our genetic material. Now, they claimed that there was a cataclysm on Earth that wiped out most of human life as we know it. Obviously, they said also it was going to be around 2012. Nothing has happened. So they might be on some alternate timeline that has now been changed by the good work that we've done since then. And that does appear to be possible, that that might have been what happened. But they still exist on a layer of time, and we're going to talk a lot more about layered time as the show goes on. They may exist on a layer of time in which there was a cataclysm. But anyway, their story is that they were in underground bases, that they survived because they lived in the underground bases when this thing happened on Earth. Now think about who's going to end up in underground bases if there was a pole shift or something like that. You're looking at New World Order or Old World Order, Illuminati types, these types of insiders, the cabal. So these were the descendants of the cabal, so they're claiming, but their gene pool got very small, and as a result their genetic material starts to wash out, and they don't have the ability to have good reproduction anymore. So they're having to do cloning, and the gene pool is very small. So what they claimed was, we're you in the future, and we need your help. So please let us do these abductions. We promise, we promise we're not going to do anything bad. We just want to pick people up, take them for a ride. They're not going to remember anything. Part of the deal was that amnesia would be created in the people who were brought on board the ships. It was told to our government that it was foolproof, that nobody would remember anything. And the treaty was said to renew and renegotiate every 9 years. Now, Tau is apparently their name for God. They revere Tau as this sort of divinity principle. 9 is also a very important number for them, and that has to do in many cases with sacred numerology. So Tau 9 and the whole idea that it renews every 9 years was part of their spiritual belief system. But they basically told our government, hey, look, we'll give you this technology. We'll give you all kinds of great gadgets. You can keep it classified. You don't have to tell the people. Just let us do what we want to do and help out our race in the future, which is really you, and we won't stand in your way. And so Majestic is thinking, well, this sounds a lot better than the other deal. I mean, the abduction thing's kind of scary. But on the other hand, you know, what do we get from it? We get technology. We get to grow and develop this secret world that they've been building. So they accepted the treaty. The treaty started in 1958, and according to Dan Burrish, it was renewed in 1967 1976, 1985, and again in 1994. Now, again, this is really, you can really say this is a secret treaty, and even to call it government is kind of dodgy, because government conducted in secrecy denies us the principles of democracy and freedom. We are not part of this decision. This is not a treaty with humanity. This is not a treaty with the United States government. It's a treaty with the military-industrial complex. And I think that's what Eisenhower started to figure out was going on, and part of why he warned in his closing address when he made the State of the Union address and basically laid it out. Look, beware the military-industrial complex. In fact, let's have that clip once again. Let's hear him say that right now.
I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
So as you can see, Eisenhower was really pretty disturbed. He stammers, he's not quite there, and he's not present, but he understands there's a problem. He understands that the military-industrial complex is starting to go out of control and lead to things that are not productive for humanity. Now, the most recent Tau 9 treaty started to be negotiated in 2003, but by this point, people are starting to figure out what's going on, and there were a lot of problems with the treaty, so it wasn't actually completed until 2005. So we are not yet into the point where the next 9-year interval comes up, but abductions have continued. There have been a lot of negotiations going on because the ETs were supposed to give our military-industrial complex, again, I don't want to call it government because it's really not. Government should be elected, should be democratic. The military-industrial complex was supposed to receive the names and addresses of everyone who was being contacted and who the genetic samples are being pulled from. That has not happened. They didn't get all that information. So this is disturbing, but then there are other insiders, such as those being revealed through Dr. Stephen Greer, who have said that this whole thing that we're talking about here is fake. That these extraterrestrial beings, alleged extraterrestrial beings, are actually being made by cloning by another faction of Majestic. And that they're playing against themselves. That unless you're at that level of the cover-up, you don't know that this whole business about the treaties and the abductions, it's all a put-up job, it's a con. But that's what these people like to do. They like to make stories up. They like to create fear. And therefore, it stands to reason that if the cabal is defeated, the abductions will stop. Because we have credible whistleblowers who say all of this was told to people at one level, but the lie is different at every level. And as you go higher up, they own these little grays, and they're running them using an advanced cloning technique that they got actually from the good guys, from crashed retrievals of disks that came here. So it's very confusing, and we don't really know what's going on, but we do know that there is tangible evidence. So I want to focus again on some of the evidence that we haven't talked about yet that can further explain, look, extraterrestrial life is definitely real. We saw them in ancient mythology. We saw their remains, their skulls. Obviously, if they're working around the Earth, they're going to build things on other places besides just the Earth. So let's look at some of that evidence now. It's really fascinating. Joseph P. Skipper is a name that has kind of gotten washed away because unfortunately people are now making YouTube videos of this stuff and they pull things from here and there and they don't do any research really. They just grab stuff and they don't know where it came from. So his website, MarsAnomalyResearch.com, came out with some stunning information that has been widely copied and stolen, almost never with credit to him, which I think is a tragedy. And so I want to give him full credit today and set the record straight. So please, everybody who uses this stuff, remember Mars Anomaly Research, Joseph Skipper. And recently there has been something interesting where his site seemed to have gone offline. He couldn't be located, but now it seems that his site is back online, actually right before I'm doing this taping. So anyway, what he found was evidence on an official NASA website. This is the Clementine satellite that was sent out and orbited around the moon in 1994. And along the way, it took a lot of pictures. As you can see, the website says it was an experimental satellite with a goal to test lightweight sensors and advanced components in space. Much of the data that they collected during the mission is displayed here in the form of still images, animations, and a lunar map. And it was jointly sponsored by the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization and NASA. So, what we start to see in the actual lunar maps is stuff like this. Now, this is one of Joseph P. Skipper's discoveries. As you can see here, the terrain around this feature looks pretty normal, but then the feature itself is tremendous. It seems that somebody tampered with this image in NASA. And the thing that's so crazy here is that 1 pixel equals 1 kilometer. This is at 68 degrees latitude, 346 degrees longitude, and you can see that it seems like this whole area is smeared out. Now, does that literally mean that there is a tower there of that size? Maybe not, because a tower that size is staggering. We're talking about miles and miles of size here. This is incredibly enormous. But it may be that there's a series of bases along here that they had to white out. Now here's the thing. For years, anybody could go to this website when it was in version 1.5, and you could see this for yourself. Let's see another example. In this case, we're seeing another weird streak here in which everything else looks fine, but then this area seems to have been deliberately blurred out. And we also see what looks like some deliberate blurring over here. And the lines here, the arrows indicate some weird striated lines. Now, it is true, and the skeptics are going to obviously want to say this, that as you take pictures of the moon, you're also going to have to process images and thread them together from multiple sources. Is it possible that this blurring effect is only caused by that? Maybe. But then we have folks like Donna Hare who are saying that they were responsible for whiting out images on lunar photographs. That seems to be the handiwork of what they're doing here. Here's another really, really strange example. I mean, the size that we're looking at here is comparable to Los Angeles. It's incredibly enormous. And yet we see all this blurring out, like there's something they really don't want you to see. This is at 70 degrees latitude, 137 degrees longitude. Let's have another one here. This is one of the most impressive ones. This is minus 72 latitude, minus 108 longitude, and it very much looks as if there is a huge dome that was hidden here. Now, why would that be there? Richard C. Hoagland talked about this quite a bit, the idea that you could build a dome out of crystal, and then inside you have an atmosphere. You could have plants, you could have trees, you could have streets, and people could walk around with no breathing apparatus. So this dome, of course, is huge. We're talking about miles and miles wide here, and it could actually be a whole entire enclosure, a base that people might be living in even now. And in fact, we've had insiders come forward and say that they've seen photographs of the bases on the moon. We've had an insider that spoke to me recently that said right now the dark side of the moon actually looks like a parking lot. If you actually were to send a satellite over it, there's so much stuff out there right now. We're getting ready for something. I do believe disclosure is coming. Now the next one we're going to look at is collection number 68 on Joseph Skipper's website. In this collection, he zooms in again on objects on the moon. Now look here. We see these two massive towering structures. Why are they blurring this out? What is it that they don't want us to see? Now, there's other places on the moon where they don't have image data and they just do a black spot. But here, they're actually doing a very distinctive blurring. And then you see another blurring over here, plus there's a strange little line right here as well. But this blurring is very distinctly and uniquely tower-shaped. So, again, these towers would be very, very large, but it's possible that they could be antenna or something like that, some kind of facility for storing information, for storing energy. We don't really know what it is, but we know that we have antennas on Earth. It could also be playing off of the pyramid effect that I've talked about extensively before. So here we see two of these massive towers. This is at 64 latitude, 265 longitude. And here's yet another example, very strange, where we're seeing again what appear to be towering structures. This is at 70 latitude, 240 longitude. A series of what look like towering structures here. And then this whole entire area has very sharp lines. It appears to have literally just been dropped in. Like there's something here that's been completely covered over. And then what's even strange too is that there's a line right here, a straight line with a series of small ridges in it, implying that maybe there's something there. Now it's possible, again, and I want to acknowledge the skeptics, it's possible that this could be just a series of photographs that were taken at a different time and that they didn't get the albedo right, that they basically blended the grayscale differently. But it also looks like there could be something behind there that's been covered up. So this is not necessarily the smoking gun. Some people have misrepresented it that way. But we see these two towers here up close now, and a lot of interesting stuff to look at there. We're also seeing towers over here. This is another close-up. And again, what looks like buildings and a row here when you look at it up close. So, another thing that Richard C. Hoagland has talked about very extensively is Apollo frame 4822. This is a fascinating story because apparently one folder in the file cabinet with one number was used to store multiple images. Now that's not supposed to happen. Every number is supposed to correspond to a different image, but once this frame was seen, Hoagland and his colleagues started sending multiple requests for the same image, and they got different photographs of the same scene. So whoever was originally responsible in the archive room for only putting out the blacked out versions of 4822 obviously wasn't working there anymore, because some of frame 4822 was totally black. And that was how we got hip to this in the first place. He started to request more shots of 4822. Other ones came out that were not all black, and they showed this. Now check that out. What you're looking at here very much appears to be a genuine base. This could be like a landing strip coming in here, and everybody wants a room with a window. Well, look at this. You got these, it's a right angle here. You got all these strips in which there could be corridors and rooms on either side with windows looking out into these courtyard areas, and probably there was originally glass over the whole thing, so you could walk around and breathe inside. And this part in the middle here appears to be a giant tower. Now, what happened was that Alex Cook, one of Hoagland's associates, started to send multiple requests for 4822 and got different photographs of it. And it appears that as the astronauts flew overhead, that they took multiple images so that they could animate them and, more importantly, get a stereo image so that you can pull out three-dimensional detail like you're using a Viewmaster slideshow or something like that. True 3D. So this is very fascinating. This shows that there is something on the moon that is not a pile of rocks, okay? Nobody's ever really talked about this adequately in the media, in my opinion. This is another frame that Richard found, which looks like some kind of antenna device. And of course, Richard's infamous for the face on Mars. I saw that photograph from NASA frame 35A72 back in the early 1980s when I first saw that picture, and it looks like this. It's very unusual. This does not appear to be a normal feature of the Martian surface. I mean, hello, it's a face. And as investigations have continued, we found very high-resolution photographs NASA's taken of this guy, which appears to be a five-sided pyramid. You can see that here, pentagonal, and it's directly, the face is only right over there. It's right nearby. So there's other pyramid-like formations in that area as well. This is very strange because it would suggest that there was a major civilization on Mars. And then to end out this week's episode, I want to take you to Phobos, which is the closest moon to Mars. Some tests of Phobos have concluded that it might actually be hollow inside. And Buzz Aldrin went on television and talked about this. On C-SPAN, Buzz Aldrin describes that there is a monolith on the surface of Mars. Now look at this. You can clearly see something poking up, and you can clearly see the shadow in the back. Just for reference, this is a photograph of Phobos, and then this little arrow shows us right where that monolith is located. It's inside a crater. It's kind of dark in this picture. But as we zoom in on it, we see this little spot of white here. You can't really make it out there, but then there's a shadow around it. And as we get in even closer, we see this little guy. Now this is pretty big. I mean, this is big enough that you'd be impressed if you were standing next to it. You can clearly see the shadow that it's casting right here. And the angle of the monolith is right here. So here's Buzz Aldrin on C-SPAN describing this, and he's saying that we should mount a mission to Mars to go look for the monolith to figure out why is it there and who built it. So disclosure is starting to happen. Things are moving forward. And as it turns out, we're seeing other objects on the Martian plateau in that same area of Phobos. We see what appears to be shadows here. They appear to be towers. So anyway, some very fast. All right, welcome to another episode of Wisdom Teachings with your host, that's me, David Wilcock. Wow, what we're starting to get into now is taking this to a whole new level. We've already talked about some of the biological principles of DNA being a quantum wave. We've talked about extraterrestrials showing up in many ancient cultures. We've talked about their ruins of architecture that are here on Earth. We showed you images of their skulls and drawings of them, including people with elongated skulls in the back. We've been through many episodes of that now. We don't need to keep showing those slides anymore. We'll probably get a lot of hate mail if I did. People want new. Well, in this episode, we are going to recover a few of the things that I talked about in the previous episode because it forms a foundation to build off of. This is episode 17, and in this episode, we're going to be going through again, the discussion about the secrecy, the working group known as Majestic 12. This is allegedly a photograph of Eisenhower meeting with the original 12, part of this secret compartmentalized program that allegedly, as we said in the previous episode, developed a treaty with extraterrestrials called Tau 9. And I said, let's see if there's any way to prove that these extraterrestrials are really out there. And one of the things that Richard C. Hoagland is really focused on is off-planet extraterrestrial archaeology. And that evidence is pretty strong. A lot of people don't realize how strong it really is. So in the last episode, we mentioned the incredible work of Joseph Skipper. His Mars Anomaly Research website is huge. He's got so many different things. He's so meticulous. He's gone through and found evidence of architecture on the moon, architecture on Mars, architecture under the ocean. He's used Google Earth, Google satellite imagery, and found all kinds of really interesting stuff. And his work is widely being plagiarized and stolen and put in videos and websites with no credit. So I'm trying to set the record straight and give him the credit that he deserves, because it's just a pirates community out there right now, unfortunately. So anyway, his report number 67 describes what may be towers on the moon photographed by the Clementine satellite in 1994. In the original version of this website, version 1.5, there was a browser where you could enter in latitude and longitude coordinates, and you would start seeing things like this. Notice that this area again is totally blurred out, and this would be a massive, massive object if it is in fact not just something that they did for no reason. But we have witnesses like Donna Hare who have come forward and said that it was her job to white out images on the moon and UFOs in photographs from NASA. We have other witnesses in the Disclosure Project who said that they saw photographs of what actually was on the moon. We have Maurice Chatelain, who wrote the book Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space, and in 1995 he came forward and said that he was shown photographs of architecture on the moon. We have multiple sources of verification, so this may be gigantic buildings that we see on the moon. We see this area blurred out here, very large area. Why would they need to do that? And importantly, NASA came back, and in version 2.0, they made it so you couldn't see these images anymore. The whole story was altered. So these coordinates and where these images are located is no longer available. This one looks like a very large area that was all blurred out for some deliberate purpose. We also see this. This is one of the most compelling ones of all. As I said, this could be like a dome covering over a large, large area. This is multiple square miles we're talking about here, because 1 pixel equals 1 kilometer. So very, very substantial sized object, if that's what it is, where people could be living and breathing an atmosphere under a crystal dome, allowing sunlight to come through. You can see outer space at night, and you can live in there and walk around, have buildings and everything just fine. Then we go up to report number 68, and in 68 we have even more examples of what look like towers here. Let's see those two guys back to back now. Sure enough, looks like something's there to me. And then we see this image where we got this guy here, this one here, and then this one over here, and a little blurring there too, as well as this whole area that looks like it was just abruptly dropped into place. Very strange. So here's that first area on the left up close. We see two distinctive features here all blurred out. Then we have this area over on the right, a very distinctive feature, looks very much like a dome, yet again. And remember now, this could be housing. There could be levels like terraces that people live in, and they can all be inside that dome. That's another possibility what that is. Look at the edge here. Look at how sharp it is. And then even the contrast-enhanced version, you see a whole series of craters in a straight line along here, and he's pointing out that there's also geometric patterns there. Now, Richard C. Hoagland has brought our attention to frames that were taken on the Apollo 10 mission. And you can order these frames from NASA, and you get a big glossy print in a nice manila envelope, and you pull it out, and certain numbers were all black. And this raised Richard Hoagland's attention. He thought maybe there was something being hidden, and he found that by asking for more copies of frame 4822, which is supposed to all be the same picture, that in fact the newer copies showed something the older ones did not, and it's this guy right here. This is incredible. As I said, if you wanted to build kind of like a huge base, you'd want to have empty space between the wings so that everybody's got a room with a view. And then you got angles here, right angle turns, you got a straight line, lots of straight lines and right angle turns, very clearly seeming to indicate an intelligently designed and built structure. This should have been a smoking gun, especially because Hoagland's colleague Alex Cook, as I said, asked for multiple frames. They got a total of, I believe, 6 different frames of 4822 showing this architecture on them from varying angles, which could be used to create a stereo view. So you could see the depth of what appears to be a largely glass-built structure. Now there's a lot of sand on the moon that you could mine and make glass out of, and of course a glass building has the advantage of being able to see everything, and having glass walls makes it a very, very lavish structure. So this could have been like a very, very classy place to live, and it may still be for all we know. We also described this little antenna looking thing that we saw on Mars, as you can see right there. And of course the face on Mars is where this all started with Richard Hoagland. He was working as a correspondent for Walter Cronkite on television, talking about space-related issues, including the Apollo missions. And then this image comes out in a frame 35A72 taken by Viking in 1976. And what we see here is a very curiously human face. And as further investigations of this face have continued, we find out that sure enough, it's got bilateral symmetry. Both sides have the same kind of headdress around it. It has eyes on both sides. This mouth continues to both sides, and the nose even appears to have nostrils. Now the thing is, though, that this would be about 1.5 miles wide. So this is an enormous, enormous object, and it may have been, again, a place where people could live. Additionally, if you go to the immediate southwest of this site, you see this, which is a huge, probably 2-mile wide, 5-sided pyramid. I'm sorry, but that's not a mountain, and it's not going to be carved by asteroids and meteor hits. What we're seeing here is very sharp edges. You can see the geometry of the edges. Buttresses down here, that's where you have to build this extra strength into the structure to be able to hold up all the stuff in the middle. If you don't do that, it will collapse. There does appear to be a wound in the ground here suggesting a missile attack where the missile went in here and blew up this whole part. This part, it seems to have been blown out, and this may actually be runoff from the melting of this structure that might have been attacked in a war. Also want to point out one other thing here, which is this appears to be a huge courtyard that also remains triangular, so you could walk out from this part of the building and go into this whole huge area where you could gather and congregate. This appears to have been a place that people lived. Hoagland's hypothesis has always been that it's what he calls an arcology, that the outside walls were all crystal, and that there's levels and levels and levels and levels of housing inside, and that people could actually go and see the view. It appears that this area was originally surrounded by ocean, and that this little area was not part of the ocean, obviously, but you could walk out and enjoy the view. Well, then we also talked about the monolith on Phobos, the nearest moon to Mars, and that moon appears to be hollow. That's another very strange thing about it. Its orbital characteristics are strange. It seems to be too close to the planet. It seems to be moving too fast. It has characteristics as if it were all hollow inside, suggesting the whole entire inside of it is a base. And we have had people come forward from various space agencies in Europe to Richard Hoagland saying that they had unequivocal proof that there were rooms inside Phobos. And they were supposed to go forward with that, but then it all got pulled at the last minute. But they had taken actual sonar readings of the inside of the moon and showed that these rooms inside were actually perfectly rectangular cubicle type rooms. And they had it all sounded out, three-dimensional reconstruction of these cubicle areas inside Phobos. How do you get in? Maybe through this. This appears to be very similar to what Arthur C. Clarke described in 2001, a monolith, and there it is sitting on the surface of Phobos. This area right here, as we said last time, you zoom in up close, you start to see a little bit of it there, casting a shadow. And again, when you look at it up close, it clearly looks like almost like a gravestone or something. This very large shard just poking straight up out of the ground, casting a shadow, does not appear to be any type of natural feature whatsoever. And we have Buzz Aldrin, who goes on C-SPAN, and he openly says that there is a monolith on Phobos. This is on national television. He said this is a monolith. Somebody appears to have built this, and we need to create a mission to Mars to go back there and figure out Why is that there? Who built it and what for? Now think about the space agency that, according to Hoagland, and I was talking to Hoagland a lot at this point, they were ready to come forward and they got stopped with these images of the interior of Phobos showing these big square rooms. So very, very interesting information here. What happened? Only, I think it was less than a week after Buzz Aldrin comes on television and makes this announcement, President Obama has a press conference in which he announces an initiative to go to Mars, that he wanted to have this be our next big space priority, and that we would stop off at a moon before we land on the surface of Mars itself to create a stopover point. The correlation between Obama's announcement and what Buzz Aldrin said on C-SPAN was obviously not a coincidence. This was very exciting when it happened, and unfortunately the story hasn't been pursued any further. But this is one of the things that I think is going to break out really quickly when we get disclosure, which may not be that far away. The lies have got to stop. The secrecy has got to stop. We also see other images here on that same moon, Phobos, suggesting other towers that were built on that moon as well. Now we're going to go to the asteroid Eros. This is in the asteroid belt, and we see some very curious features here too. Look at this. You look up close, this is 500 meters of distance, so it's not as big as the ones on the moon, but we have at least two areas that look like squares. And this one down here could also be one as well. Now, why would that be there? Again, craters don't make square impressions. Meteors don't hit, or asteroids don't hit or collide with each other and make a square dent. But what if there was an underground base that was built on this asteroid? They hollowed it out on the inside. And then over time, that base might have been abandoned, it might have been attacked in a war, it might have been blown up, it might have had a collision with another asteroid, and it collapses in on itself. The whole inside of the base is predominantly hollow, so the top goes whoosh, and it falls in, and then you see the edges, and then you see all this dust and the surface material of the asteroid left behind. We've had insiders tell me that in fact asteroids have been hollowed out, and that this has been something that's been done frequently. That appears to be one of those cases that slipped through the cracks that we've been able to get access to. Now this is really interesting. NASA didn't just come out from nowhere. NASA needed to have the support of the American people because it cost a lot of money. NASA had to wage, what became NASA, had to wage a massive publicity campaign in order to get this going. And interestingly enough, who is NASA? A lot of the German scientists after World War II, Nazis, were brought over in Project Paperclip. We've talked about that before. Brought over in Project Paperclip, including Wernher von Braun, who really launched NASA and became the figurehead for NASA. But before they got NASA going, they had to sell the American people on it. There were a series of 3 documentaries that were made by Disney and were aired on major broadcast television. And this is the second one. This is called Man and the Moon. Came out in 1956. Now what's so interesting about this is that you have the American people getting revved up for the idea of a mission to the moon. In this series you see a rocket launch, you see a space probe that goes around the moon, and then a very interesting thing happens because the guys inside the spaceship report an unusual heat signature on the surface of the moon, and they want to get a closer look at it. They launch a flare, and when the flare lights up the surface of the moon, you get this screeching dissonance in the show, this very music that's like, woo, you know, really kind of jolting. And then you cut back and forth between these guys in the spaceship looking down at this feature on the surface of the moon. Now this is on a major television network, made by Disney, multi-million-dollar budget, and look at this. Very obviously a base on the surface of the moon. All along, folks, They've been getting ready to tell us the truth. All along, they've been giving you little pieces. Here's the base. Here's the guys in the spaceship looking down on it, and they're in awe of what they're seeing. Now, did they ever mention this base in the television show after that initial view? No. All you see is this base. It cuts between the base and these guys. That goes back and forth for about 12 seconds while you're seeing this crashing dissonant music, and they never talk about it again. They just pick up like nothing happened. It's very, very strange. But what is the intention? To get the American people to think that if they support NASA and put ultimately billions of dollars into this, that we might find something on the moon. Well, maybe they already knew. Because if the Nazis had the Bell technology, if they had flying saucer craft that were a combination of Victor Schauberger's work and stuff that they got from extraterrestrial meetings that took place apparently in 1936 in the Himalayas, where they met with the Anunnaki, these 12 to 14 feet tall extraterrestrials, taught them how to build these saucers, they might have already known what they were going to find when they went up there. Another piece of evidence that Richard Hoagland has bravely brought out, and something that I want to make sure gets into wisdom teachings here, is Tom Corbett's Space Cadet. Now, this is a series of Viewmaster slides that also formed a pitch. I will argue that this pitch is what ultimately became Arthur C. Clarke's 2001. Because Arthur C. Clarke says that he was approached with an existing storyline. I believe that this has all the nuggets of what became 2001 hidden in it, and it becomes pretty obvious. They tweaked the story, they shortened it up a little bit, they did some things, but there's a lot of very curious stuff in this. So here's the Viewmaster slides themselves from the original production, and what we see, if you can look closely here, there's three slides: the moon pyramid, the red planet, and the mystery of the asteroids. And again, the date here, I didn't have the date. I believe it's 1956. So we have these three sections. The first section is called the moon pyramid. This is one of the slides from the Viewmaster in which the astronauts go to the moon after finding an unusual signature again, and they see this tetrahedron on the moon's surface, complete with a capstone, just like the Illuminati pyramid. And then there's a map of Mars inside. You see an image of Mars with a map that includes coordinates, and this coordinate is where they're supposed to go next. Now, what's interesting about this is that Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 was originally written as finding a tetrahedron on the surface of the moon. So this clearly appears to be the early pitch. Just put in a Viewmaster slide. These Tom Corbett slides were very, very popular. They made a lot of money on this, believe me, because it was 3D. You could look and see dimensionality in it, so that's what gave it some novelty. Then they go to where this little dot tells them to go to on Mars, and they come up against this. They find a feline-shaped monument, as well as what you see here looks like an obelisk, just like what we saw on Phobos. Now, this feline-shaped monument is very curiously similar to the face on Mars in the way that it looks. And then the feline monument has a map on it that leads to them going to the asteroid belt, where they then find an asteroid that has a monolith on it, and they go into the monolith, and then they get this archive. And it tells them about this extraterrestrial species that built everything. And they see what appears to be a hologram. In 1956, the story describes a hologram, a little image of light that you could put your hand through that shows you what happened. And apparently they say that this was a civilization that had colonized our solar system, that had made war with each other, and they'd fought each other, and they died out, and they blew up their planet, and that's what created the asteroid belt. All of this stuff is hidden in this Viewmaster image, this series of, because you get a little book, right? You look at the slides and then you read the book, and the book tells you the story. Well, this is amazing. And, of course, when you flip over the one side of the face on Mars and you make it so that both sides are the same, it looks more simian or ape-like, but then the other side looks very much like a lion. How did they know this? Well, I think they knew it because they visited. And so there's a lot that you haven't been told. You see, it's all starting to unravel here. Then, one of the top comic book artists of his time, Jack Kirby, appears to have been commissioned again by the people who made NASA. They were putting it out through every form of advertising and marketing they could. They wanted the youth. They wanted to get the kids excited. Mommy, mommy, I want to see astronauts. I want to see people in space. How do they do that? Use the Viewmaster. Use comic books. Get kids excited about space exploration. Well, one of the ways they did this is by creating a comic which actually has the title, The Race for the Moon. Notice that you're seeing flying saucers right on the cover of this issue, which is issue number 2. They want you to think about the flying saucer phenomenon. They want you to think that maybe if we go back to the moon, we're going to learn something. But let's take a closer look. Look down here, because not only do we have the great red spot on Jupiter becoming like a portal, which was a similar concept that was used in 2001, we see this guy right here, the face on Mars. Let's look at that up close for a minute. From the moon to the red planet, where you will see the great eyes that look out across the ages and they have a story to tell, listen to the giant face on Mars. Where did they get this from in 1956? If they didn't have the Bell technology, if they didn't have flying saucers, that they'd already been there, they'd already seen it, they already knew what they were going to find, how the heck do you explain this? Look at the actual cover now of the comic. We see these guys climbing up the face. Even the way the face looks is extremely similar to what we actually see on the surface of Mars. Richard Hoagland was the one who found this and brought this out to the public. And his website is enterprisemission.com. He frequently appears on Coast to Coast with George Norrie. And I'm delighted that he has given me full permission to use these images in my talks, because some of the things that he's come out with are really important and they need to be stressed, and I wanted this to be in my show. Once again, what we see in this show, in this particular episode of the comic book, is that there was an interplanetary war. Right here he says it's an interplanetary invasion. Those creatures which you see here are destroying all life on a worldwide scale. The same series of things happen. We hear about the face on Mars now. We hear about an interplanetary war, that they blew up a planet that became the asteroid belt. Starting to sound pretty familiar. The same thing keeps happening. So as we go through all this, my introduction to everything that we're talking about was in 1992. I was a typical college student. I had just gotten sober from any and all chemicals. I was occasionally using marijuana and alcohol. I completely quit all that stuff. I'd been clean for about 4 or 5 months, I guess, 6 months, something like that. It was in February 1992. My date of sobriety was September 23rd, I believe, 1992. This happened in 1993. So that date is wrong, actually. That should be 1993. In 1993, I had a friend of mine come to visit me, come into my dorm. He looks white as a piece of paper. He says, "David, you need to sit down. I got to tell you something really amazing." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, I don't really know where to begin, but my physics professor worked for NASA throughout the 1970s. I said, "You want me to sit down for this?" He said, "No, you really need to sit down." So I did. Okay, so he worked for NASA for the 1970s, big deal. But then my friend goes on and says, he told me that aliens are real, UFOs exist, and everybody at the higher levels of NASA knows it, and it's all being covered up and concealed. Now that got my attention. This professor came forward with all kinds of information, told my friend that the Roswell crash was real, that the evidence was covered up, and that all these things were derived from the crash. Velcro, Kevlar, fiber optics, Teflon, LED lights, laser beams, and infrared night vision. And of course, additionally, we have solid-state transistors and computer chips. The whole computer revolution that we now have would not have existed without the benefit of this recovered technology. That's pretty amazing. And there were 3 different types of beings inside, and one of them was the typical tall, the mid-sized gray type with the large black eyes, a large head, spindly body. There was a small gray, and they actually found that it was a helmet, and that underneath the helmet was what they called a monstrosity. They didn't explain what that meant. At least this physics professor did not. But the tallest version looked like a normal human. And they were inside these ships. Now, I heard all this back in 1993, and it had a tremendous, tremendous effect on me. My friend also told me that they had figured out how the ship would accelerate to near light speed. Basically, it would shoot out a particle of radiation going 3/4 the speed of light, and then it would shoot a particle of radiation out going the speed of light, a trillionth of a second later, and like billiard balls, it would bounce off of the particle that was already out there, bounce back and hit the ship. And by doing this trillions of times a second, it actually creates a pressure that pushes the ship forward and can reach light speed very quickly. So, this triggered me into 4 years of obsessive research where I started to write my dreams down every morning, and it led up to some very amazing stuff where I found this work. Hi, welcome to another episode of Wisdom Teachings. I'm David Wilcock, and we are having some of the most fun yet, in my view, because we're getting into some very controversial and fascinating subjects here. So in this week's episode, we're going to talk about another 1950s ET contact. In the previous episode, we were talking about the science of time, and how that science was disclosed through George Van Tassel, one of the 3 Georges. And we're going to come back to those 3 Georges later on. I wanted to take a little deviation from that for now, get away from some of the more technical stuff. We will bring it back in later. And talk today in episode 25 about the Golden Age prophecies that have appeared in some of these ancient teachings that are now being supported by modern day contacts. So the 1950s contacts are a valuable link to the Golden Age prophecies, because what we're going to see here is that human extraterrestrials who appeared in the Bible, who appeared as gods in ancient cultures, have made attempts to reach people in our modern 20th century history on a pretty widespread level. Now, they've also greeted our governments. In some cases, they've portaled in and directly appeared in a governmental office. An interesting fact that you, as the savvy Wisdom Teachings viewer, probably already know about would be the story in American history of Saint Germain. Specifically, when the Declaration of Independence was going to be signed. The benefit of hindsight is pretty remarkable, where we can see that, okay, the Declaration of Independence worked, the Revolutionary War worked, Britain was defeated, America became independent, but the Declaration of Independence was only the start of the Revolutionary War. It wasn't like everything just magically went away. We had to fight for freedom in this country, and it didn't come easily. Now, the people who signed the Declaration of Independence knew that they could be tortured and killed for this whole idea, and that it might not even work. They had ancient prophecies that America was ultimately founded on. This is not well known, but Francis Bacon was in fact the founder of the Masonic order, There's a lot of good literature that says that Francis Bacon was actually the illegitimate son of Queen Elizabeth. And he didn't find this out until he got older. It was kept from him as a secret. There is a whole drawer in the Library of Congress card catalog, according to William T. Still in his book, New World Order, The Ancient Plan of Secret Societies. A whole drawer in the Library of Congress card catalog of books just dedicated to saying that Francis Bacon had been William Shakespeare and was the primary author of the Shakespearean plays. Isn't that something? Why would he do that? Well, they argue that Francis Bacon was the only person educated enough to have been a writer. Normally a writer was not considered a very prestigious career. They didn't have the education, they didn't have the background. There was a real William Shakespeare, and the real William Shakespeare was illiterate. When he died, there were no books in his house. He could only sign his name with an X. And they basically hired him as a patsy, as a stand-in for a literary team that Francis Bacon was coordinating and was the main author of. But just like some of the top film composers who write film scores, like Hans Zimmer, it's well known that Hans Zimmer hires a bunch of other composers to write parts of the film score, and then they all go as Hans Zimmer, and he does the final pass, the final edit on whatever they do, spruces it up, but he uses other talent. Similarly, the Shakespearean plays appear to have been organized by Francis Bacon, but he had other writers involved as well. After the real William Shakespeare, the patsy, died, there's a quote that says, "We put arsenic in the nitwit's beer," because apparently he was trying to shake them down for hush money and wanted to be paid more than he was being paid to be the William Shakespeare who had to hide away, wasn't allowed to talk to anybody because in fact he didn't know anything. You couldn't ask him about his plays because he didn't write them. No books in his house when he died, as I said, so they poisoned him, and then posthumously William Shakespeare released something like 6 more plays. Now, the Shakespearean plays were actually being used to expose conspiracies that were going on in real day-to-day life in the royal family, because Francis Bacon was very, very antagonistic towards his mother, Elizabeth, especially once he found out that he had lost his right to be the heir to the throne. Specifically because she had a child with Lord Dudley who was very unpopular, and she had to maintain this illusion of being the virgin queen. If you watch the movie Elizabeth, you can see the whole relationship developing between her and Lord Dudley. What they don't tell you is that they had a kid, that the kid was Francis Bacon. She gave the kid to her lady-in-waiting, Lady Bacon, and Lady Bacon raised Francis Bacon. So Francis Bacon is kind of the modern father of the Illuminati. He took a lot of Mithraic mystery school traditions. He got access to the Vatican Library, went back to the old texts that were hidden away in the Vatican Library, and I've heard this from very high levels of secrecy, Francis Bacon was in fact on early sailing ships and sailed to the New World on a classified mission before they publicly announced, because they didn't want to send these sailors over there to look for something that wasn't there. So just like how they're going to run it on a classified level before they do it on a public level, they did secret missions to the New World before they did it on an open public level. Francis Bacon was on one of those secret missions, and what I was told by these insiders is that the play The Tempest is actually based on those secret missions that Francis himself was involved in. So he himself, on what for the time was very highly classified, sailed to the New World, saw the New World, and then created his plan as Francis Bacon, not as Shakespeare, for what's called the New Atlantis. America was the New Atlantis. And so there is a prophecy of America that goes all the way back to scriptures that they found in the Vatican Library, which come from the Library of Alexandria, where the Atlanteans themselves predicted that they were going to mass reincarnate and recreate a new version of their civilization. And it was decided to be called America by Francis Bacon and his cohorts. And America was an experiment. America was an experiment to see if there could be a launching place, a country, that would help launch this new world that was predicted to occur in the Atlantean mystery texts. The New World's a pretty fascinating subject because it's what springs us into the Golden Age, you see. So Francis Bacon believed that the creation of America was necessary to have this launching point for the Golden Age. So all of these ideas about a constitution that guaranteed rights and liberties and freedom, intrinsic freedoms, including freedom of religion, that wasn't in great abundance back then, in the 1600s. You didn't have freedom of religion. You didn't have the kind of freedom that we now take for granted in much of the modern Western world. It was much more tightly controlled, and the American Constitution paved the way for that. So there was a large body of land that could create a power center to kind of start over and create this insulated society that didn't have all of its entanglement with old Europe and with the Middle East and everything else. It's in its own separate little area of land that's been largely undeveloped, which allowed them to create a constitution to set a seed in place for a whole new way of doing things. So, Francis Bacon, Bacon's New Atlantis, they did lie, this is a classic Illuminati kind of thing, by telling people that if you go to this new world that the streets are lined with gold, that they're peeing in gold urns. They don't even care. There's gold everywhere. So the original manipulation was to get people to sail to the new world because they believed that they were going to become fabulously rich if they came over here. That, of course, didn't happen. But then they start to colonize. That leads to the Revolutionary War, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which was all part of the plan to construct the New Atlantis. In earlier episodes, you've seen me go through the Great Seal of the United States, which contains two different quotes from Virgil. Anu et Septis is a quote from Virgil, as I was just reading in a book the other day, and Novus Ordo Seclorum, which is talking about the idea that there will be golden people on earth, that there will be a golden race that we transform into. It's fascinating that all that was consolidated by the time Charles Thomson had consolidated the designs for the Great Seal in 1782. So it goes way, way back in time. They were building the pyramid in, the all-seeing eye, the prophecy of a coming golden age. It was written right into the Constitution. The Constitution was all part of that. What you may or may not know, and some of you will know this, is that when they were signing the Declaration of Independence, they chained themselves in. They locked the doors so that you couldn't get in except, unless you were already in the room, there's no way you're getting out and nobody's getting in. While they were in there, a human that looked like us appeared out of nowhere, and he knew all of the Masonic handshakes at the highest possible level. So they're like, who the heck is this guy? How can he do the magic handshakes and know all the codes and the sigils and the passwords and everything? And what happened is this guy, who many people call Saint Germain, gave a stirring, rousing speech to the people saying, you have to sign the Declaration of Independence. It's very important for the future of the humanity on earth and for this golden age that you are here to create. That's why they were in the room in secret, so nobody would hear how they're planning that they're going to create this golden age by making America. But it's all written into the Great Seal. They knew what they were doing. These people were Freemasons. The Boston Tea Party was Masonic in nature. There's lots of literature you can read on that. They canceled their Masonic Lodge meeting, and there's a Masonic poster where at the bottom it says, "We all went out for a cup of tea." So they put blackface on, pretended they were Indians, dumped the tea out of the ships, created a protest against taxation without representation, to repeal the British Empire, create a separate faction, which originally I do believe was positive, and it got co-opted by the British again. British bankers came in and tried to take this thing over. But there's been a resistance effort going all the way back to the foundation of America, where they created this secret cabal to break away from America, and that resistance group has been working ever since. Lincoln was a part of it. Lincoln got taken over by the British. The British bankers wanted 24 to 34% tax on American money, so that when we're spending our money, we're paying this tax to Britain. They tried to do it again. The Federal Reserve System was where they got their control. So there's been this ongoing effort to try to break away from the British Empire. Didn't really work, but it's still a war that's being fought today. So there's an extraterrestrial that manifested in the Declaration of Independence, in the signing. This guy just manifests in the room. Through the locked doors, he knows all the right stuff, he can read people's minds, and he is able to convince them that he's some kind of divine being, and that's what got people to sign their names on the Declaration of Independence. There's lots of things you can read about that. Manly Palmer Hall talked about it extensively. So that's another example of Golden Age prophecies written into the sign on the dollar bill. Believe me, I believe Saint Germain had something to do with that, and the ET contacts were part of what led to that golden prophecy that's on the Great Seal. And they came back in modern times. In the 1950s, human extraterrestrials went to Italy, and they called themselves the Acri, A-K-R-I-J. There is a very interesting documentary on Italian television that you can watch for free online, at least you can right now. There's different copies of it on YouTube, and I hope it will always be available out there, in which it's called The Friendship Case. And it discusses human extraterrestrials meeting with over 100 different people in Italy, and apparently they had a large base in Italy that they were operating from. Some of these people were tall, some of them were shorter than us, and they had really advanced technology. And this seems to have been an effort to normalize relations between people on Earth and people from outer space, without getting into all the cosmic weird stuff, but just keeping it light and fun, and, you know, just let's shake hands, let's get to know each other. So they revealed that this was the name Acri in Sanskrit, that this was their actual symbol in Sanskrit of who they are, and that they had appeared in those ancient cultures. They also said that they had appeared to the Egyptians, and this is what the name Acri would be written as in Egyptian hieroglyphics. When you watch this Italian documentary, it's very fascinating because some of the people who actually met the Acri in person are still alive, and you get to meet them in the documentary. You get to hear what they had to say, you get to see the results of the contacts that occurred, and there's some very strange things that happened because the group was called the Acri. It was also called the W56. They were human-looking extraterrestrials, but as you see here in this illustration, the heights were very different. The tall ones were approximately 12 feet tall. They were wearing ordinary civilian clothes. Like you see here, he's got a typical Oxford-type shirt on. And the shorter one, of course, also looks like us. Now, these three guys, as you hear about in the documentary, were the people who were at the core group that was being contacted. These folks said that they represented a larger confederation, a larger group. As you can see here, the tall one's about twice as tall as they are. The shorter one is significantly shorter than they are. And these people were actually showing up in person, walking around with them, and giving them information. So it's pretty fascinating that these people apparently appeared, and there's over 100 witnesses to this. Now, also they said that their bases were located underneath Italy, and this base in particular was approximately a square shape, more like a rectangle, between Rimini and Ortona, so this is a major part of the whole length of Italy. And it's the base of the W56. It's about 300 kilometers long and 150 kilometers wide, kind of deep below the surface. And what they said, what the W56 or the Acri said, is that they would actually push the land away. They had some kind of dematerialization technology where they could go underground and actually just push the land out of position, and if they ever had to leave, they cranked the field off, and all the surrounding land that was moved away to make this base just moves back to the way it had been before. The whole base just completely disappears. So they're able to just mush things out of the way like that. Well, there's a lot of interesting things about this contact that very nicely dovetail what we hear in the Law of One. For example, the Acri are definitely the good guys, and they say that their ability to help humanity is a direct function of the level of spiritual advancement that we have. The harmony of the people they were contacting was extremely important to whether they could be allowed to appear on Earth or not. And as the harmony of the group fractured, they actually started to get defeated by negative extraterrestrials because they only have as much power as they're given by our harmony. They can only do as much as they're allowed to do by our level of harmony. That fits what the Law of One series says perfectly. They call it the calling, and they say that they have to be called by us. We have to have the desire, we have to have the good karma for them to be able to help us. Now, another really interesting thing here is we have a whole book called Mass Contacts by Stefano Breccia, and that's mentioned in the documentary, describing the spiritual philosophy, to some degree, not too much, of these beings, and describing what was going on. Now, one of the witnesses who actually met with these beings in person is featured in the Italian television documentary, and what we find out is that in this magazine, this Italian magazine, Domenica del Corriere, we have the ETs setting up an agreement with him that they would pose for photographs. And these photographs were allowed to be taken and were published in this groundbreaking issue of Domenica del Corriere. So, we have a series of photographs that appear that were actually where the ETs could speak to them, sometimes through their radios. Again, sometimes they would appear in person. They could speak through electronic devices as well. And they said, go to such and such place at such and such time. We will be there. Bring your cameras and we will let you photograph us. Now, this is before the era of Photoshop. It's before the era of advanced photo manipulation. But what you see here is pictures of their ships flying over one of these chimneys or towers in Italy. Here's a series of photographs that were part of a deliberately orchestrated treaty between the ETs and humanity. And what they say is that this is one of their ships, and this little black spot on the top is actually a gravitational effect, the result of them creating an electromagnetic bottle around the UFO, and it darkens the area around it, and in some cases it's going to disappear. So there's multiple shots of this UFO in the sky. It has been photoanalyzed. There is no evidence of tampering with this photograph. There's no evidence of it being some frisbee that they threw up into the air. It has all the hallmarks of being a massive object that was photographed, making maneuvers. It goes in and out of frame. The focus of the background changes as it goes in and out of frame. Here's a very nice shot of it. You can see the glass dome, and again that distension of the top where it becomes black. There's another example. You can actually see some of the glass here. And there's another example. Now in this case, it may be that the ship was not quite in our reality. It was a little out of focus. So you can see that it kind of looks blurry there. Now this next shot is truly amazing. This is a shot where it's a little out of focus again, but the gravitational distortion effect does not affect the top of the ship here for some reason. There's actually two people standing in it. You can kind of see a slight change in the darkness inside the ship. Those are two people standing there inside this glass dome that allows them to look out. Now again, people say ha 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 ha, but the thing is, this was witnessed by over 100 different people at various times. These beings would show up in person. They could portal things out. One of the agreements that was made, which was kind of strange, and some skeptics say, oh, I don't know if I like that, was that these beings said, if you want us to help you, you need to help us. So in the television show, they talk about how at times they had to use their own money and buy entire truckloads full of food and clothing to give to these extraterrestrial humans. And what they would do if there was a drop-off is they would have the truck driver go off and have a coffee break for a half an hour, and they'd say, go have your coffee and we will unload the truck for you. You don't need to unload the truck. Just park it at a certain location. The ACRI would portal out the contents of the whole entire truck, all the clothes, all the food. They liked fruit in particular. They were very big on natural food. They weren't so interested in cooked food. They wanted raw, natural food like fruit and vegetables, especially fruit, bananas and so forth. So they'd portal this stuff out of the truck. Then the truck driver would come back and he'd say, wow, you unloaded really fast. And they'd say, yeah, we work quick. But it was the ACRI that were doing this. Now, these are people that are risking their reputations and careers to come forward on Italian national television and tell this story. American press, not a word. No discussion ever about this case, which is fascinating. Whole books have been written on this case. And as you see, there's all these photographs in the Italian magazine. Now, this is even more mind-blowing because as far as I'm aware, these are the only photographs that we have ever obtained where a human being from Earth was actually brought inside a UFO and was allowed to photograph the controls of the UFO inside the ship itself. You're actually seeing here the controls of the ship. Now, we'll turn it a little bit and take a look at it here. You can see that there appears to be some kind of a hole that you'd put your hand over. And I've seen this in my dreams, actually. I've seen this, there's another image of it there, that you put your fingers over it and light comes out and you can control the movement of the ship. We really don't know what all these different things do. There's a little triangular piece here. There's something that kind of looks like a handle that you can crank. And as we zoom in up close, you can kind of see that crankable handle more, the triangular piece there. And here's this little thing that looks like a box, a little top on it. So we don't really know how all this stuff works, but it's very fascinating because there's so much credibility. There's so many interconnecting witnesses in this case. Some of them are still around. This is one of the witnesses looking at the photographs in Domenica del Corriere, which was the magazine that they put this into, talking about some of the different things, and that includes photographs of the UFOs and all this stuff. So these beings were showing up in front of these people. There's multiple eyewitnesses saying that they could make objects appear and disappear. Sometimes they would ask a question out loud. The beings wouldn't even be present, and then the answer would come in a piece of paper that they'd written on, and the paper would just materialize in the air and the answer would be written on it. There is also an audio recording of one of the beings speaking to them, and you can hear the audio in the television show. So these beings were walking around, talking and doing their thing, and it's a fascinating case and one that really deserves more investigation. I'm only kind of giving you an overview of it here, but before we end this episode, I want to talk about another very significant 1950s ET endowment. This actually comes from a book in the 1970s where he summarized the best of the 1950s contactee reports. The Space Story in the Inner Light by Baird Wallace. The date, as you can see here, originally was June 1972. As you can see right there. And then it was revised in 1975. Now, here he's summarizing testimony from multiple people that claim to be in contact with these human ETs. This movement is changing the vibratory rate of the magnetic energies in the nucleus of the atoms on our planet. It will have great impact on the forms and expression of plant and animal life and great impact on the consciousness of man. This has already started and is being amplified because man has fallen behind the evolution of the planet in his spiritual evolution and is not prepared for this change. The quality of life in fourth density, which we are now moving into, is the quality of emergence, the recognition from childhood of the inner presence of our Creator. Man in this cycle will undergo many changes and refinements in the sensitivity of his own physical body. A whole new vista and scope of the nature of life will open up before him, and he will live with the knowledge of his purpose and a deep indwelling allegiance to the spirit of his Creator. Summarizing various sources dealing with these events, major rearrangements in the orientation of the planetary and satellite bodies within the solar system will occur. Vulcan, the closest planet to the sun, which in Law of One they say is an invisible planet, but it is apparently causing gravitational perturbations. Vulcan will be absorbed into the sun. Pluto will be lost from the solar system. It will get kicked out into the blackness of space. The moon is expected to leave Earth's orbit and become its own planet, and the remaining planets will have major changes in their orbital paths. So this is the summary now of all the different things that were gathered by W.B. Smith as he vetted out these different channelers, as I've said in previous episodes, and got them to answer the same 100 questions and heard what they had to say. A new balance will come about which will result in many advantages to the expression of a more spiritualized life within the solar system. I believe this event is literally the cosmic manifestation of the fulfillment of the words which Jesus the Christ spoke of in describing these terms, the coming of the bridegroom, which is the wedding of flesh to spirit. The contact sources tell us that the solar emanations from this new sun, as it changes its energy, will have a direct impact in refining and spiritualizing our nervous system as we pass into the new condition of life which celestial events are bringing to this world. So, it is my belief that the Italian contacts that were occurring in the 1950s, which over 100 people had with these unusual human extraterrestrials, that was an effort they were having to try to normalize relations. We saw in a previous episode with Francis Swan that they contacted us and the FBI here in America, and that they wanted to have 5,000 motherships appear over our skies in August 1954 to pave the way for this dimensional change. Now, they couldn't get that done, but we actually have the benefit of this extraordinary, rich legacy of 1950s contacts in which we see that they are preparing us for some sort of energetic change. So as we go on in wisdom teachings, I want to get you familiar with the spiritual teachings of what's going to happen, how time and space itself will be changing, and how you can prepare for this incredible ascension into what they've called fourth density. This is Wisdom Teachings here on Gaiam TV, and I'm David Wilcock. Thank you for watching.